Beggars in Spain by Nancy Kress. Read by Nick Sullivan. Book 1. Lisha, 2008. With energy and sleepless vigilance, go forward and give us victories. Abraham Lincoln to Major General Joseph Hooker, 1863. 1. They sat stiffly on his antique Eames chairs, two people who didn't want to be here, or one person who didn't want to, and one who resented the other's reluctance. Dr. Ong had seen this before. Within 2 minutes, he was sure. The woman was the silently furious resistor. She would lose. The man would pay for it later, in little ways, for a long time. I presume you've performed the necessary credit checks already, Roger Camden said pleasantly. So let's get right on to details, shall we, Doctor? Certainly, Ong said. Why don't we start by your telling me all the genetic modifications you're interested in for the baby? The woman shifted suddenly on her chair. She was in her late 20s, clearly a second wife, but already had a faded look, as if keeping up with Roger Camden was wearing her out. Ong could easily believe that. Mrs. Camden's hair was brown, her eyes were brown, her skin had a brown tinge that might have been pretty if her cheeks had had any color. She wore a brown coat, neither fashionable nor cheap, and shoes that looked vaguely orthopedic. Ong glanced at his records for her name, Elizabeth. He would bet people forgot it often. Next to her, Roger Camden radiated nervous vitality. A man in late middle age whose bullet-shaped head did not match his careful haircut and Italian silk business suit. Ong did not need to consult his file to recall anything about Camden. A caricature of the bullet-shaped head had been the leading graphic for yesterday's online edition of the Wall Street Journal. Camden had led a major coup in cross-border data atoll investment. Ong was not sure what cross-border data atoll investment was. A girl, Elizabeth Camden said. Ong hadn't expected her to speak first. Her voice was another surprise. Upper-class British. Blonde, green eyes, tall, slender. Ong smiled. Appearance factors are the easiest to achieve, as I'm sure you already know, but all we can do about slenderness is give her a genetic disposition in that direction. How you feed the child will naturally... Yes, Roger Camden said. That's obvious. Now, intelligence. High intelligence. And a sense of daring. I'm sorry, Mr. Camden. Personality factors are not yet understood well enough to allow genetic... Just testing, Camden said, with a smile that Ong thought was probably supposed to be lighthearted. Elizabeth Camden said, musical ability? Again, Mrs. Camden, a disposition to be musical is all we can guarantee. Good enough, Camden said. The full array of corrections for any potential gene-linked health problem, of course. Of course, Dr. Ong said. Neither client spoke. So far, theirs was a fairly modest list, given Camden's money. Most clients had to be argued out of contradictory genetic tendencies, alteration overload, or unrealistic expectations. Ong waited. Tension prickled in the room like heat. And, Camden said, no need to sleep. Elizabeth Camden jerked her head sideways to look out the window. Ong picked up a paper magnet from his desk. He made his voice pleasant. May I ask how you learned whether that genetic modification program exists? Camden grinned. You're not denying it exists. I give you full credit for that, Doctor. Ong held his temper. May I ask how you learned whether the program exists? Camden reached into an inner pocket of his suit. The silk crinkled and pulled. Body and suit came from different classes. Camden was, Ong remembered, a Yagaiist, a personal friend of Kenzo Yagai himself. Camden handed Ong hard copy. Program specifications. Don't bother hunting down the security leak in your databanks, Doctor. You won't find it. But, if it's any consolation, neither will anybody else. Now. He leaned forward suddenly. His tone changed. I know that you've created 20 children who don't need to sleep at all. That so far, 19 are healthy, intelligent, and psychologically normal. In fact, they're better than normal. They're all unusually precocious. The oldest is already 4 years old and can read in 2 languages. I know you're thinking of offering this genetic modification on the open market in a few years. All I want is a chance to buy it for my daughter now, at whatever price you name. Ong stood. I can't possibly discuss this with you unilaterally, Mr. Camden. Neither the theft of our data, which wasn't a theft. Your system developed a spontaneous bubble regurgitation into a public gate. You'd have a hell of a time proving otherwise. Nor the offer to purchase this particular genetic modification lie in my sole area of authority. Both have to be discussed with the Institute's board of directors. By all all means, by all means. When can I talk to them too? You? Camden, still seated, looked up at him. It occurred to Ong that there were few men who could look so confident 18 inches below eye level. Certainly. I'd like the chance to present my offer to whoever has the actual authority to accept it. That's only good business. This isn't solely a business transaction, Mr. Camden. It isn't solely pure scientific research either, Camden retorted. You're a for-profit corporation here, with certain tax breaks available only to firms meeting certain fair practice laws. For a minute, Ong couldn't think what Camden meant. Fair practice laws? Are designed to protect minorities who are suppliers. I know it hasn't ever been tested in the case of customers, except for redlining in Y-energy installations, but it could be tested, Dr. Ong. Minorities are entitled to the same product offerings as non-minorities. I know the Institute would not welcome a court case, Doctor. None of your 20 genetic beta test families is either black or Jewish. A court? But you're not black or Jewish. I am a different minority, Polish-American. The name was Kaminsky. Camden finally stood and smiled warmly. Look, it is preposterous. You know that, and I know that. And we both know what a grand time journalists would have with it anyway. And you know that I don't want to sue you with a preposterous case just to use the threat of premature and adverse publicity to get what I want. I don't want to make threats at all. Believe me, I don't. I just want this marvelous advancement you've come up with for my daughter. His face changed to an expression Ong wouldn't have believed possible on those particular features. Wistfulness. Doctor, do you know how much more I could have accomplished if I hadn't had to sleep all my life? Elizabeth Camden said harshly. You hardly sleep now. Camden looked down at her as if he had forgotten she was there. Well, no, my dear, not now, but when I was young, college, I might have been able to finish college and still support... Well, none of that matters now. What matters, Doctor, is that you and I and your board come to an agreement. Mr. Camden, please leave my office now. You mean before you lose your temper at my presumptuousness? You wouldn't be the first. I'll expect to have a meeting set up by the end of next week, whenever and wherever you say, of course. Just let my personal secretary, Diane Clavers, know the details. Anytime that's best for you. Ong did not accompany them to the door. Pressure throbbed behind his temples. In the doorway, Elizabeth Camden turned. What happened to the 20th one? What? The 20th baby. My husband said 19 of them are healthy and normal. What happened to the 20th? The pressure grew stronger, hotter. Ong knew that he should not answer. That Camden probably already knew the answer, even if his wife didn't. That he, Ong, was going to answer anyway. That he would regret the lack of self-control bitterly later. The 20th baby is dead. His parents turned out to be unstable. They separated during the pregnancy, and his mother could not bear the 24-hour crying of a baby who never sleeps. Elizabeth Camden's eyes widened. She killed it? By mistake, Camden said shortly. Shook the little thing too hard. He frowned at Ong. Nurses, Doctor, in shifts. You should have picked only parents wealthy enough to afford nurses in shifts. That's horrible, Mrs. Camden burst out. And Ong could not tell if she meant the child's death, the lack of nurses, or the Institute's carelessness. Ong closed his eyes. When they had gone, he took 10 milligrams of cyclobenzaprine 3 for his back. It was solely for his back. The old injury was hurting again. Afterward, he stood for a long time at the window, still holding the paper magnet, feeling the pressure recede from his temples, feeling himself calm down. Below him, Lake Michigan lapped peacefully at the shore. The police had driven away the homeless in another raid just last night, and they hadn't yet had time to return. Only their debris remained, thrown into the bushes of the lakeshore park, tattered blankets, newspapers, plastic bags, like pathetic trampled standards. It was illegal to sleep in the park. Illegal to enter it without a residence permit. Illegal to be homeless and without a residence. As Ong watched, uniformed park attendants began methodically spearing newspapers and shoving them into clean, self-propelled receptacles. Ong picked up the phone to call the chairman of Biotech Institute's board of directors. 4 men and 3 women sat around the polished mahogany table of the conference room. Doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, thought Susan Melling, looking from Ong to Sullivan to Camden. She smiled. Ong caught the smile and looked frosty. Pompous ass. Judy Sullivan, the Institute lawyer, turned to speak in a low voice to Camden's lawyer, a thin, nervous man with the look of being owned. The owner, Roger Camden, the Indian chief himself, was the happiest-looking person in the room. The lethal little man. What did it take to become that rich, starting from nothing? She, Susan, would certainly never know. Radiated excitement. He beamed. He glowed. So unlike the usual parents to be that Susan was intrigued. Usually, the prospective daddies and mommies, especially the daddies, sat there looking as if they were at a corporate merger. Camden looked as if he were at a birthday party. Which, of course, he was. Susan grinned at him, and was pleased when he grinned back. Wolfish, but with a sort of delight that could only be called innocent. What would he be like in bed? Ong frowned majestically and rose to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're ready to start. Perhaps introductions are in order. Mr. Roger Camden, Mrs. Camden, are of course our clients. Mr. John Jaworski, Mr. Camden's lawyer. Mr. Camden, this is Judith Sullivan, the Institute's head of legal. Samuel Crenshaw, representing Institute Director Dr. Brad Marsteiner, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, and Dr. Susan Melling, who developed the genetic modification affecting sleep. A few legal points of interest to both parties. Forget the contracts for a minute, Camden interrupted. Let's talk about the sleep thing. I'd like to ask a few questions. Susan said, What would you like to know? Camden's eyes were very blue in his blunt-featured face. He wasn't what she had expected. Mrs. Camden, who apparently lacked both a first name and a lawyer, since Jaworski had been introduced as her husband's but not hers, looked either sullen or scared. It was difficult to tell which. Ong said sourly, Then perhaps we should start with a short presentation by Dr. Melling. Susan would have preferred a Q&A to see what Camden would ask, but she had annoyed Ong enough for one session. Obediently, she rose. Let me start with a brief description of sleep. Researchers have known for a long time that there are actually three kinds of sleep. One is slow-wave sleep, characterized on an EEG by delta waves. One is rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep, which is much lighter sleep and contains most dreaming. Together, these two make up core sleep. The third type of sleep is optional sleep, so-called because people seem to get along without it, with no ill effects, and some short sleepers don't do it at all, sleeping naturally only 3 or 4 hours a night. That's me, Camden said. I trained myself into it. Couldn't everybody do that? Apparently they were going to have a Q&A after all. No. The actual sleep mechanism has some flexibility, but not the same amount for every person. The raphe nuclei on the brain stem, Ong said. I don't think we need that level of detail, Susan. Let's stick to basics. Camden said, The raphe nuclei regulate the balance among neurotransmitters and peptides that leads to a pressure to sleep, don't they? Susan couldn't help it. She grinned. Camden, the laser-sharp, ruthless financier, sat trying to look solemn, a third grader waiting to have his homework praised. Ong looked sour. Mrs. Camden looked away out the window. Yes, that's correct, Mr. Camden. You've done your research. Camden said, This is my daughter. And Susan caught her breath. When was the last time she had heard that note of reverence in anyone's voice? But no one in the room seemed to notice. Well then, Susan said, you already know that the reason people sleep is because a pressure to sleep builds up in the brain. Over the past 20 years, research has determined that's the only reason. Neither slow-wave sleep nor REM sleep serve functions that can't be carried on while the body and brain are awake. A lot goes on during sleep, but it can go on during wakefulness just as well, if other hormonal adjustments are made. Sleep served an important evolutionary function. Once Clem pre-mammal was done filling his stomach and squirting his sperm around, sleep kept him immobile and away from predators. Sleep was an aid to survival, but now it's a leftover mechanism, a vestige, like the appendix. It switches on every night, but the need is gone. So we turn off the switch at its source, in the genes. Ong winced. He hated it when she oversimplified like that. Or maybe it was the lightheartedness he hated. If Marsteiner were making this presentation, there'd be no Clem pre-mammal. Camden said, What about the need to dream? Not necessary. A leftover bombardment of the cortex to keep it on semi-alert in case a predator attacked during sleep. Wakefulness does that better. Why not have wakefulness instead, then? From the start of the evolution. He was testing her. Susan gave him a full, lavish smile, enjoying his brass. I told you, safety from predators. But when a modern predator attacks, say, a cross-border data atoll investor, It's safer to be awake. Camden shot at her. What about the high percentage of REM sleep in fetuses and babies? Still an evolutionary hangover. Cerebrum develops perfectly well without it. What about neural repair during slow-wave sleep? That does go on, but it can go on during wakefulness if the DNA is programmed to do so. No loss of neural efficiency as far as we know. What about the release of human growth enzyme in such large concentrations during slow-wave sleep? Susan looked at him admiringly. Goes on without the sleep. Genetic adjustments tie it to other changes in the pineal gland. What about the side effects? Mrs. Camden said, her mouth turned down. What about the bloody side effects? Susan turned to Elizabeth Camden. She had forgotten she was there. The younger woman stared at Susan, mouth turned down at the corners. I'm glad you asked that, Mrs. Camden, because there are side effects. Susan paused. She was enjoying herself. Compared to their age mates, the non-sleep children, who have not had IQ genetic manipulation, are more intelligent, better at problem solving, and more joyous. Camden took out a cigarette. The archaic, filthy habit surprised Susan. Then she saw that it was deliberate. Roger Camden was drawing attention to an ostentatious display to draw attention away from what he was feeling. His cigarette lighter was gold, monogrammed, innocently gaudy. Let me explain, Susan said. REM sleep bombards the cerebral cortex with random neural firings from the brainstem. Dreaming occurs because the poor, besieged cortex tries so hard to make sense of the activated images and memories. It spends a lot of energy doing that. Without that energy expenditure, non-sleep cerebrums save the wear and tear and do better at coordinating real-life input, thus greater intelligence and problem solving. Also, doctors have known for 60 years that antidepressants, which lift the mood of depressed patients, also suppress REM sleep entirely. What they have proved in the past 10 years is that the reverse is equally true. Suppress REM sleep, and people don't get depressed. The non-sleep kids are cheerful, outgoing, joyous. There's no other word for it. At what cost? Mrs. Camden said. She held her neck rigid, but the corners of her jaw worked. No cost, no negative side effects at all. So far, Mrs. Camden shot back. Susan shrugged. So far? They're only 4 years old at the most. Ong and Crenshaw were studying her closely. Susan saw the moment the Camden woman realized it. She sank back into her chair, drawing her fur coat around her, her face blank. Camden did not look at his wife. He blew a cloud of cigarette smoke. Everything has costs, Dr. Melling. She liked the way he said her name. Ordinarily, yes, especially in genetic modification. But we honestly have not been able to find any here, despite looking. She smiled directly into Camden's eyes. Is it too much to believe that just once the universe has given us something wholly good, wholly a step forward, wholly beneficial, without hidden penalties? Not the universe. The intelligence of people like you, Camden said, surprising Susan more than anything else that had gone before. His eyes held hers. She felt her chest tighten. I think, Dr. Ong said dryly, that the philosophy of the universe may be beyond our concerns here. Mr. Camden, if you have no further medical questions, perhaps we can return to the legal points Ms. Sullivan and Mr. Jaworski have raised. Thank you, Dr. Melling. Susan nodded. She didn't look again at Camden, but she knew what he said, how he looked, that he was there. The house was about what she had expected, a huge mock Tudor on Lake Michigan, north of Chicago. The land was heavily wooded between the gate and the house, open between the house and the surging water. Patches of snow dotted the dormant grass. Biotech had been working with the Camdens for 4 months, but this was the first time Susan had driven to their home. As she walked toward the house, another car drove up behind her. No, a truck, continuing around the curved driveway to a service entry at the side of the house. One man rang the service bell. A second began to unload a plastic-wrapped playpen from the back of the truck, white with pink and yellow bunnies. Susan briefly closed her eyes. Camden opened the door himself. She could see his effort not to look worried. You didn't have to drive out, Susan. I'd have come into the city. No, I didn't want you to do that, Roger. Mrs. Camden is here? In the living room. Camden led her into a large room with a stone fireplace. English country house furniture and prints of dogs or boats all hung 18 inches too high. Elizabeth Camden must have done the decorating. She did not rise from her wing chair as Susan entered. Let me be concise and fast, Susan said. I don't want to make this any more drawn out for you than I have to. We have all the amniocentesis, ultrasound, and Langston test results. The fetus is fine, developing normally for 2 weeks. No problems with the implant on the uterine wall, But a complication has developed. What? Camden said. He took out a cigarette, looked at his wife, and put it back unlit. Susan said quietly, Mrs. Camden, by sheer chance, both your ovaries released eggs last month. We removed one for the gene surgery. By more sheer chance, the second was fertilized and implanted. You're carrying 2 fetuses. Elizabeth Camden grew still. Twins? No, Susan said. Then she realized what she had said. I mean, yes, they're twins, but non-identical. Only one has been genetically altered. The other will be no more similar to her than any 2 siblings. It's a so-called normal baby. And I know you didn't want a so-called normal baby. Camden said, No, I didn't. Elizabeth Camden said, I did. Camden shot her a fierce look that Susan couldn't read. He took out the cigarette again and lit it. His face was in profile to Susan, and he was thinking intently. She doubted he knew the cigarette was there, or that he was lighting it. Is the baby being affected by the other ones being there? No, Susan said. No, of course not. They're just coexisting. Can you abort it? Not without aborting both of them. Removing the unaltered fetus would cause changes in the uterine lining that would probably lead to a spontaneous miscarriage of the other. She drew a deep breath. There's that option, of course. We can start the whole process over again. But, as I told you at the time, you were very lucky to have the in vitro fertilization take on only the 2nd try. Some couples take 8 or 10 tries. If we started all over, the process could be a lengthy one. Camden said, Is the presence of this second fetus harming my daughter? Taking away nutrients or anything? Or will it change anything for her later on in the pregnancy? No, except that there is a chance of premature birth. 2 fetuses take up a lot more room in the womb, and if it gets too crowded, birth can be premature. But how premature? Enough to threaten survival? Most probably not. Camden went on smoking. A man appeared at the door. Sir, London calling. James Kendall for Mr. Yagai. I'll take it. Camden rose. Susan watched him study his wife's face. When he spoke, it was to her. All right, Elizabeth. All right. He left the room. For a long moment, the 2 women sat in silence. Susan was aware of disappointment. This was not the Camden she had expected to see. She became aware of Elizabeth Camden watching her with amusement. Oh, yes, Doctor. He's like that. Susan said nothing. Completely overbearing. But not this time. She laughed softly with excitement. 2? Do you know what sex the other one is? Both fetuses are female. I wanted a girl, you know, and now I'll have one. Then you'll go ahead with the pregnancy? Oh, yes. Thank you for coming, Doctor. She was dismissed. No one saw her out. But as she was getting into her car, Camden rushed out of the house, coatless. Susan, I wanted to thank you for coming all the way out here to tell us yourself. You already thanked me. Yes, well, you're sure the second fetus is no threat to my daughter? Susan said deliberately. Nor is the genetically altered fetus a threat to the naturally conceived one. He smiled. His voice was low and wistful. And you think that should matter to me just as much. But it doesn't. And why should I fake what I feel? Especially to you. Susan opened her car door. She wasn't ready for this. Or she had changed her mind, or something. But then Camden leaned over to close the door, and his manner held no trace of flirtatiousness, no smarmy ingratiation. I better order a second playpen. Yes. And a second car seat. Yes. But not a second night shift nurse. That's up to you. And you. Abruptly, he leaned over and kissed her, a kiss so polite and respectful that Susan was shocked. Neither lust nor conquest would have shocked her. This did. Camden didn't give her a chance to react. He closed the car door and turned back toward the house. Susan drove toward the gate, her hands shaky on the wheel until amusement replaced shock. It had been a deliberately distant, respectful kiss, an engineered enigma, and nothing else would have guaranteed so well that there would have to be another. She wondered what the Camdens would name their daughters. Dr. Ong strode the hospital corridor, which had been dimmed to half light. From the nurse's station in maternity, a nurse stepped forward as if to stop him. It was the middle of the night, long past visiting hours. Got a good look at his face and faded back into her station. Around a corner was the viewing glass to the nursery. To Ong's annoyance, Susan Melling stood pressed against the glass. To his further annoyance, she was crying. Ong realized that he had never liked the woman. Maybe not any women. Even those with superior minds could not seem to refrain from being made damn fools by their emotions. "Look," Susan said, laughing a little, swiping at her face. "Doctor, look!" Behind the glass, Roger Camden, gowned and masked, was holding up a baby in a white undershirt and pink blanket. Camden's blue eyes, theatrically blue, a man really should not have such garish eyes, glowed. The baby's head was covered with blonde fuzz. It had wide eyes and pink skin. Camden's eyes above the mask said that no other child had ever had these attributes. Ong said, "An uncomplicated birth?" "Yes," Susan Melling sobbed. "Perfectly straightforward. Elizabeth is fine. She's asleep." "Isn't she beautiful? He has the most adventurous spirit I've ever known." She wiped her nose on her sleeve. Ong realized that she was drunk. "Did I ever tell you that I was engaged once, 15 years ago, in med school? I broke it off because he grew to seem so ordinary, so boring." "Oh, God, I shouldn't be telling you all this. I'm sorry. Ong moved away from her. Behind the glass, Roger Camden laid the baby in a small wheeled crib. The nameplate said, "Baby Girl Camden No. 1, 5.9 pounds. A night nurse watched indulgently. Ong did not wait to see Camden emerge from the nursery, or to hear Susan Melling say to him whatever she was going to say. Ong went to have the OB paged. Melling's report was not, under the circumstances, to be trusted. A perfect, unprecedented chance to record every detail of gene alteration with a non-altered control, and Melling was more interested in her own sloppy emotions. Ong would obviously have to do the report himself, after talking to the OB. He was hungry for every detail. And not just about the pink-cheeked baby in Camden's arms. He wanted to know everything about the birth of the child in the other glass-sided crib, baby girl Camden No. 2, 5.1 pounds. The dark-haired baby with the mottled red features, lying scrunched down in her pink blanket, asleep. 2. Lisha's earliest memory was flowing lines that were not there. She knew they were not there, because when she reached out her fist to touch them, her fist was empty. Later she realized that the flowing lines were light, sunshine slanting in bars between curtains in her room, between the wooden blinds in the dining room, between the crisscross lattices in the conservatory. The day she realized the golden flow was light, she laughed out loud with the sheer joy of discovery, and Daddy turned from putting flowers in pots and smiled at her. The whole house was full of light. Light bounded off the lake, streamed across the high white ceilings, puddled on the shining wooden floors. She and Alice moved continually through light, and sometimes Lisha would stop and tip back her head and let it flow over her face. She could feel it like water. The best light, of course, was in the conservatory. That's where Daddy liked to be when he was home from making money. Daddy potted plants and watered trees, humming, and Lisha and Alice ran between the wooden tables of flowers with their wonderful earthy smells, running from the dark side of the conservatory where the big purple flowers grew to the sunshine side, with sprays of yellow flowers, running back and forth in and out of the light. "Growth," Daddy said to her. "Flowers all fulfilling their promise. Alice, be careful. You almost knocked over that orchid." Alice, obedient, would stop running for a while. Daddy never told Lisha to stop running. After a while, the light would go away. Alice and Lisha would have their baths. And then Alice would get quiet or cranky. She wouldn't play nice with Lisha, even when Lisha let her choose the game or even have all the best dolls. Then Nanny would take Alice to bed, and Lisha would talk with Daddy some more until Daddy said he had to work in his study with the papers that made money. Lisha always felt a moment of regret that he had to go do that, but the moment never lasted very long, because Mamselle would arrive and start Lisha's lessons, which she liked. Learning things was so interesting. She could already sing 20 songs and write all the letters in the alphabet and count to 50. And by the time lessons were done, the light had come back, and it was time for breakfast. Breakfast was the only time Lisha didn't like. Daddy had gone to the office, and Lisha and Alice had breakfast with Mommy in the big dining room. Mommy sat in a red robe, which Lisha liked, but she didn't smell funny or talk funny the way she would later in the day. But still, breakfast wasn't fun. Mommy always started with the question. "Alice, sweetheart, how did you sleep?" "Fine, Mommy." "Did you have any nice dreams?" For a long time, Alice said no. Then one day she said, "I dreamed about a horse. I was riding him." Mommy clapped her hands and kissed Alice and gave her an extra sticky bun. After that, Alice always had a dream to tell Mommy. Once Lisha said, "I had a dream too. I dreamed light was coming in the window, and it wrapped all around me like a blanket, and then it kissed me on my eyes. Mommy put down her coffee cup so hard that coffee sloshed out of it. Don't lie to me, Lisha. You did not have a dream. Yes, I did, Lisha said. Only children who sleep can have dreams. Don't lie to me. You did not have a dream. Yes, I did, Lisha shouted. She could see it, almost, the light streaming in the window and wrapping around her like a golden blanket. I will not tolerate a child who is a liar. Do you hear me, Lisha? I won't tolerate it. You're a liar, Lisha shouted, knowing the words weren't true, hating herself because they weren't true, but hating Mommy more, and that was wrong, too. And there sat Alice, stiff and frozen, with her eyes wide. Alice was scared, and it was Lisha's fault. Mommy called sharply. Nanny! Nanny, take Lisha to her room at once. She can't sit with civilized people if she can't refrain from telling lies. Lisha started to cry. Nanny carried her out of the room. Lisha hadn't even had her breakfast. But she didn't care about that. All she could see while she cried was Alice's eyes, scared like that, reflecting broken bits of light. But Lisha didn't cry long. Nanny read her a story, and then played data jump with her. And then Alice came up, and Nanny drove them both into Chicago to the zoo, where there were wonderful animals to see. Animals Lisha could not have dreamed, nor Alice either. And by the time they came back, Mommy had gone to her room, and Lisha knew that she would stay there with the glasses of funny-smelling stuff the rest of the day, and Lisha would not have to see her. But that night, she went to her mother's room. I have to go to the bathroom, she told Mamselle. Mamselle said, Do you need any help? Maybe because Alice still needed help in the bathroom. But Lisha didn't, and she thanked Mamselle. Then she sat on the toilet for a minute, even though nothing came, so that what she had told Mamselle wouldn't be a lie. Lisha tiptoed down the hall. She went first into Alice's room. A little light in a wall socket burned near the crib. There was no crib in Lisha's room. Lisha looked at her sister through the bars. Alice lay on her side with her eyes closed. The lids of the eyes fluttered quickly, like curtains blowing in the wind. Alice's chin and neck looked loose. Lisha closed the door very carefully and went to her parents' room. They didn't sleep in a crib, but in a huge, enormous bed with enough room between them for more people. Mommy's eyelids weren't fluttering. She lay on her back, making a sound through her nose. The funny smell was strong on her. Lisha backed away and tiptoed over to Daddy. He looked like Alice, except that his neck and chin looked even looser. Folds of skin collapsed like the tent that had fallen down in the backyard. It scared Lisha to see him like that. Then Daddy's eyes flew open so suddenly that Lisha screamed. Daddy rolled out of bed and picked her up, looking quickly at Mommy, but she didn't move. Daddy was wearing only his underpants. He carried Lisha out into the hall where Mamselle came rushing up saying, Oh, sir, I'm sorry. She just said she was going to the bathroom. It's all right, Daddy said. I'll take her with me. No, Lisha screamed, because Daddy was only in his underpants and his neck had looked all funny and the room smelled bad because of Mommy. But Daddy carried her into the conservatory, sat her down on a bench, wrapped himself in a piece of green plastic that was supposed to cover up plants, and sat down next to her. Now, what happened, Lisha? What were you doing? Lisha didn't answer. You were looking at people sleeping, weren't you? Daddy said. And because his voice was softer, Lisha mumbled, Yes. She immediately felt better. It felt good not to lie. You were looking at people sleeping because you don't sleep and you were curious, weren't you? Like Curious George in your book? Yes, Lisha said. I thought you said you made money in your study all night. Daddy smiled. Not all night, some of it. But then I sleep, although not very much. He took Lisha on his lap. I don't need much sleep, so I get a lot more done at night than most people. Different people need different amounts of sleep, and a very few, are like you. You don't need any. Why not? Because you're special. Better than other people. Before you were born, I had some doctors help make you that way. Why? So you could do anything you want to, and make manifest your own individuality. Lisha twisted in his arms to stare at him. The words meant nothing. Daddy reached over and touched a single flower growing on a tall potted tree. The flower had thick white petals like the cream he put in coffee, and the center was a light pink. See, Lisha, this tree made this flower because it can. Only this tree can make this kind of wonderful flower. That plant hanging up there can't, and those can't either. Only this tree. Therefore, the most important thing in the world for this tree to do is grow this flower. The flower is the tree's individuality. That means just it and nothing else made manifest. Nothing else matters. I don't understand, Daddy. You will, someday. But I want to understand now, Lisha said, and Daddy laughed with pure delight and hugged her. The hug felt good, but Lisha still wanted to understand. When you make money, is that your that thing? Yes, Daddy said happily. Then nobody else can make money? Like only that tree can make that flower? Nobody else can make it just the way I do. What do you do with the money? I buy things for you. This house, your dresses, Mamselle to teach you, the car to ride in. What does the tree do with the flower? Glory's in it, Daddy said, which made no sense. Excellence is what counts, Lisha. Excellence supported by individual effort. And that's all that counts. I'm cold, Daddy. Then I better bring you back to Mamselle. Lisha didn't move. She touched the flower with one finger. I want to sleep, Daddy. No, you don't, sweetheart. Sleep is just lost time, wasted life. It's a little death. Alice sleeps? Alice isn't like you. Alice isn't special? No, you are. Why didn't you make Alice special, too? Alice made herself. I didn't have a chance to make her special. The whole thing was too hard. Lisha stopped stroking the flower and slipped off Daddy's lap. He smiled at her. My little questioner. When you grow up, you'll find your own excellence, and it will be a new order, a specialness the world hasn't ever seen before. You might even be like Kenzo Yagai. He made the Yagai generator that powers the world. Daddy, you look funny wrapped in the flower plastic. Lisha laughed. Daddy did too. But then she said, when I grow up, I'll make my specialness find a way to make Alice special too. And Daddy stopped laughing. He took her back to Mamselle, who taught her to write her name, which was so exciting she forgot about the puzzling talk with Daddy. There were 6 letters, all different, and together they were her name. Lisha wrote it over and over, laughing, and Mamselle laughed too. But later in the morning, Lisha thought again about the talk with Daddy. She thought of it often, turning the unfamiliar words over and over in her mind like small hard stones. But the part she thought about most wasn't a word. It was the frown on Daddy's face, when she told him she would use her specialness to make Alice special too. Every week, Dr. Melling came to see Lisha and Alice, sometimes alone, sometimes with other people. Lisha and Alice both liked Dr. Melling, who laughed a lot and whose eyes were bright and warm. Often Daddy was there too. Dr. Melling played games with them, first with Alice and Lisha separately, and then together. She took their pictures and weighed them. She made them lie down on a table and stuck little metal things to their temples, which sounded scary but wasn't, because there were so many machines to watch, all making interesting noises while they were lying there. Dr. Melling was as good at answering questions as Daddy. Once Lisha said, is Dr. Melling a special person, like Kenzo Yagai? And Daddy laughed and glanced at Dr. Melling and said, oh, yes, indeed. When Lisha was 5, she and Alice started school. Daddy's driver took them every day into Chicago. They were in different rooms, which disappointed Lisha. The kids in Lisha's room were all older, but from the first day she adored school, with its fascinating science equipment and electronic drawers full of math puzzlers, and other children to find countries on the map with. In half a year, she had been moved to yet a different room, where the kids were still older, but they were nonetheless nice to her. Lisha started to learn Japanese. She loved drawing the beautiful characters on thick white paper. The Solly School was a good choice, Daddy said. But Alice didn't like the Solly School. She wanted to go to school on the same yellow bus as Cook's daughter. She cried and threw her paints on the floor at the Solly School. Then Mommy came out of her room. Lisha hadn't seen her for a few weeks, although she knew Alice had, and threw some candlesticks from the mantelpiece on the floor. The candlesticks, which were china, broke. Lisha ran to pick up the pieces, while Mommy and Daddy screamed at each other in the hall by the big staircase. She's my daughter, too, and I say she can go. You don't have the right to say anything about it. A weepy drunk, the most rotten role model possible for both of them. And I thought I was getting a fine English aristocrat. You got what you paid for. Nothing. Not that you ever needed anything from me or anybody else. Stop it, Lisha cried. Stop it. There was silence in the hall. Lisha cut her fingers on the china. Blood streamed onto the rug. Daddy rushed in and picked her up. Stop it, Lisha sobbed, and didn't understand when Daddy said quietly, you stop it, Lisha. Nothing they do should touch you at all. You have to be at least that strong. Lisha buried her head in Daddy's shoulder. Alice transferred to Carl Sandburg Elementary School, riding there on the yellow school bus with Cook's daughter. A few weeks later, Daddy told them that Mommy was going away to a hospital to stop drinking so much. When Mommy came out, he said she was going to live somewhere else for a while. She and Daddy were not happy. Lisha and Alice would stay with Daddy, and they would visit Mommy sometimes. He told them this very carefully, finding the right words for truth. Truth was very important, Lisha already knew. Truth was being true to yourself, your specialness, your individuality. An individual respected facts, and so always told the truth. Mommy, Daddy did not say, but Lisha knew, did not respect facts. I don't want Mommy to go away, Alice said. She started to cry. Lisha thought Daddy would pick Alice up, but he didn't. He just stood there looking at them both. Lisha put her arms around Alice. It's all right, Alice. It's all right. We'll make it all right. I'll play with you all the time we're not in school so you don't miss Mommy. Alice clung to Lisha. Lisha turned her head so she didn't have to see Daddy's face. 3. Kenzo Yagai was coming to the United States to lecture. The title of his talk, which he would give in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, with a repeat in Washington as a special address to Congress, was The Further Political Implications of Inexpensive Power. Lisha Camden, 11 years old, was going to have a private introduction after the Chicago talk, arranged by her father. She had studied the theory of cold fusion at school, and her global studies teacher had traced the changes in the world resulting from Yagai's patented low-cost applications of what had, until him, been unworkable theory. The rising prosperity of the Third World, the death throes of the old communistic systems, the decline of the oil states, the renewed economic power of the United States. Her study group had written a news script, filmed with the school's professional quality equipment, about how a 1985 American family lived with expensive energy costs and a belief in tax-supported help, while a 2019 family lived with cheap energy and a belief in the contract as the basis of civilization. Parts of her own research puzzled Lisha. Japan thinks Kenzo Yagai was a traitor to his own country, she said to Daddy at supper. No, Camden said. Some Japanese think that. Watch out for generalizations, Lisha. Yagai patented and licensed Y energy in the United States because here there were at least the dying embers of individual enterprise. Because of his invention, our entire country has slowly swung back toward an individual meritocracy, and Japan has slowly been forced to follow. Your father held that belief all along, Susan said. Eat your peas, Lisha. Lisha ate her peas. Susan and Daddy had only been married less than a year. It still felt a little strange to have her there, but nice. Daddy said Susan was a valuable addition to their household, intelligent, motivated, and cheerful, like Lisha herself. Remember, Lisha, Camden said, a man's worth to society and to himself doesn't rest on what he thinks other people should do or be or feel, but on himself, on what he can actually do and do well. People trade what they do well, and everyone benefits. The basic tool of civilization is the contract. Contracts are voluntary and mutually beneficial, as opposed to coercion, which is wrong. The strong have no right to take anything from the weak by force, Susan said. Alice, eat your peas too, honey. Nor the weak to take anything by force from the strong, Camden said. That's the basis of what you'll hear Kenzo Yagai discuss tonight, Lisha. Alice said, I don't like peas. Camden said, your body does. They're good for you. Alice smiled. Lisha felt her heart lift. Alice didn't smile much at dinner anymore. My body doesn't have a contract with the peas. Camden said a little impatiently, yes, it does. Your body benefits from them. Now eat. Alice's smile vanished. Lisha looked down at her plate. Suddenly she saw a way out. No, Daddy, look. Alice's body benefits, but the peas don't. It's not a mutually beneficial consideration. So there's no contract. Alice is right. Camden let out a shout of laughter. To Susan he said, 11 years old. 11. Even Alice smiled, and Lisha waved her spoon triumphantly, light glinting off the bowl and dancing silver on the opposite wall. But even so, Alice did not want to go hear Kenzo Yagai. She was going to sleep over at her friend Julie's house. They were going to curl their hair together. More surprisingly, Susan wasn't coming either. She and Daddy looked at each other a little funny at the front door, Lisha thought, but Lisha was too excited to think about this. She was going to hear Kenzo Yagai. Yagai was a small man, dark and slim. Lisha liked his accent. She liked, too, something about him that took her a while to name. Daddy, she whispered in the half-darkness of the auditorium. He's a joyful man. Daddy hugged her in the darkness. Yagai spoke about spirituality and economics. A man's spirituality, which is only his dignity as a man, rests on his own efforts. Dignity and worth are not automatically conferred by aristocratic birth. We have only to look at history to see that. Dignity and worth are not automatically conferred by inherited wealth. A great heir may be a thief, a wastrel, cruel, an exploiter, a person who leaves the world much poorer than he found it. Nor are dignity and worth automatically conferred by existence itself. A mass murderer exists, but is of negative worth to his society and possesses no dignity in his lust to kill. No. The only dignity, the only spirituality rests on what a man can achieve with his own efforts. To rob a man of the chance to achieve, and to trade what he achieves with others, is to rob him of his spiritual dignity as a man. This is why communism has failed in our time. All coercion, all force to take from a man his own efforts to achieve, causes spiritual damage and weakens a society. Conscription, theft, fraud, violence, welfare, lack of legislative representation, all rob a man of his chance to choose, to achieve on his own, to trade the results of his achievement with others. Coercion is a cheat. It produces nothing new. Only freedom. The freedom to achieve, the freedom to trade freely the results of achievement, creates the environment proper to the dignity and spirituality of man. Lisha applauded so hard her hands hurt. Going backstage with Daddy, she thought she could hardly breathe. Kenzo Yagai. But backstage was more crowded than she had expected. There were cameras everywhere. Daddy said, "Mr. Yagai, may I present my daughter Lisha?" And the cameras moved in close and fast, on her. A Japanese man whispered something in Kenzo Yagai's ear, and he looked more closely at Lisha. "Ah, yes." "Look over here, Lisha," someone called, and she did. A robot camera zoomed so close to her face that Lisha stepped back, startled. Daddy spoke very sharply to someone, then to someone else. The cameras didn't move. A woman suddenly knelt in front of Lisha and thrust a microphone at her. "What does it feel like to never sleep, Lisha?" "What?" Someone laughed. The laugh was not kind. "Breeding geniuses." Lisha felt a hand on her shoulder. Kenzo Yagai gripped her very firmly and pulled her away from the cameras. Immediately, as if by magic, a line of Japanese men formed behind Yagai, parting only to let Daddy through. Behind the line, the three of them moved into a dressing room, and Kenzo Yagai shut the door. "You must not let them bother you, Lisha," he said in his wonderful accent. "Not ever. There is an old Asian proverb, 'The dogs bark, but the caravan moves on.' You must never let your individual caravan be slowed by the barking of rude or envious dogs." "I won't," Lisha breathed, not sure yet what the words really meant, knowing there was time later to sort them out, to talk about them with Daddy. For now, she was dazzled by Kenzo Yagai, the actual man himself who was changing the world without force, without guns, by trading his special individual efforts. "We study your philosophy at my school, Mr. Yagai." Kenzo Yagai looked at Daddy. Daddy said, "A private school, but Lisha's sister also studies it, although cursorily, in the public system. Slowly, Kenzo, but it comes. It comes." Lisha noticed that he did not say why Alice was not here tonight with them. Back home, Lisha sat in her room for hours, thinking over everything that had happened. When Alice came home from Julie's the next morning, Lisha rushed toward her. But Alice seemed angry about something. "Alice, what is it?" "Don't you think I have enough to put up with at school already?" Alice shouted. "Everybody knows, but at least when you stayed quiet it didn't matter too much. They stopped teasing me. Why did you have to do it?" "Do what?" Lisha said, bewildered. Alice threw something at her, a hard-copy morning paper, on newsprint flimsier than the Camden systems used. The paper dropped open at Lisha's feet. She stared at her own picture, 3 columns wide, with Kenzo Yagai. The headline said, "Yagai in the Future. Room for the rest of us? Why energy inventor confers with sleep-free daughter of mega financier Roger Camden." Alice kicked the paper. "It was on TV last night, too. On TV! I work hard not to look stuck up or creepy, and you go and do this. Now Julie probably won't even invite me to her slumber party next week." She rushed up the broad, curving stairs to her room. Lisha looked down at the paper. She heard Kenzo Yagai's voice in her head. "The dogs bark, but the caravan moves on." She looked at the empty stairs. Aloud she said, "Alice, your hair looks really pretty curled like that." 4. I want to meet the rest of them, Lisha said. Why have you kept them from me this long? I haven't kept them from you at all, Camden said. Not offering is not the same as denial. Why shouldn't you be the one to do the asking? You're the one who now wants it. Lisha looked at him. She was 15, in her last year at the Solly School. Why didn't you offer? Why should I? I don't know, Lisha said, but you gave me everything else, including the freedom to ask for what you want. Lisha looked for the contradiction and found it. Most things that you provided for my education, I didn't ask for, because I didn't know enough to ask, and you as the adult did. But you've never offered the opportunity for me to meet any of the other sleepless mutants. Don't use that word, Camden said sharply. So you must either think it was not essential to my education, or else you had another motive for not wanting me to meet them. Wrong, Camden said. There's a third possibility. That I think meeting them is essential to your education, that I do want you to, but this issue provided a chance to further the education of your self-initiative by waiting for you to ask. All right, Lisha said, a little defiantly. There seemed to be a lot of defiance between them lately, for no good reason. She squared her shoulders, her new breasts thrust forward. I'm asking, how many of the Sleepless are there? Who are they? And where are they? Camden said, if you're using that term, the Sleepless, you've already done some reading on your own. So you probably know that there are 1,082 of you so far in the United States, more in foreign countries, most of them in major metropolitan areas. 79 are in Chicago, most of them still small children. Only 19 anywhere are older than you. Lisha didn't deny reading any of this. Camden leaned forward in his study chair to peer at her. Lisha wondered if he needed glasses. His hair was completely gray now, sparse and stiff, like lonely broom straws. The Wall Street Journal listed him among the 100 richest men in America. Women's Wear Daily pointed out that he was the only billionaire in the country who did not move in the society of international parties, charity balls, and social secretaries. Camden's jet ferried him to business meetings around the world, to the chairmanship of the Hugo Economics Institute, and to very little else. Over the years, he had grown richer, more reclusive, and more cerebral. Lisha felt a rush of her old affection. She threw herself sideways into a leather chair, her long, slim legs dangling over the arm. Absently, she scratched a mosquito bite on her thigh. Well then, I'd like to meet Richard Keller. He lived in Chicago, and was the beta test Sleepless closest to her own age. He was 17. Why ask me? Why not just go? Lisha thought there was a note of impatience in his voice. He liked her to explore things first, then report on them to him later. Both parts were important. Lisha laughed. You know what, Daddy? You're predictable. Camden laughed, too. In the middle of the laugh, Susan came in. He certainly is not. Roger, what about that meeting in Buenos Aires on Thursday? Is it on or off? When he didn't answer, her voice grew shriller. Roger, I'm talking to you. Lisha averted her eyes. 2 years ago, Susan had finally left genetic research to run Camden's house and schedule. Before that, she had tried hard to do both. Since she had left biotech, it seemed to Lisha Susan had changed. Her voice was tighter. She was more insistent that Cook and the gardener follow her directions exactly, without deviation. Her blonde braids had become stiff, sculptured waves of platinum. It's on, Roger said. Well, thanks for at least answering. Am I going? If you like. I like. Susan left the room. Lisha rose and stretched. Her long legs rose on tiptoe. It felt good to reach, to stretch, to feel sunlight from the wide windows wash over her face. She smiled at her father, and found him watching her with an unexpected expression. Lisha? What? See Keller. But be careful. Of what? But Camden wouldn't answer. The voice on the phone had been noncommittal. Lisha Camden. Yes, I know who you are. 3 o'clock on Thursday? The house was modest. A 30-year-old colonial on a quiet suburban street where small children on bicycles could be watched from the front window. Few roofs had more than one Y-energy cell. The trees, huge old sugar maples, were beautiful. Come in, Richard Keller said. He was no taller than she, stocky, with a bad case of acne. Probably no genetic alterations except sleep, Lisha guessed. He had thick dark hair, a low forehead, and bushy black brows. Before he closed the door, Lisha saw him stare at her car and driver, parked in the driveway next to a rusty 10-speed bike. I can't drive yet, she said. I'm still 15. It's easy to learn, Richard said. So, you want to tell me why you're here? Lisha liked his directness. To meet some other Sleepless. You mean you never have? Not any of us? You mean the rest of you know each other? She hadn't expected that. Come to my room, Lisha. She followed him to the back of the house. No one else seemed to be home. His room was large and airy, filled with computers and filing cabinets. A rowing machine sat in one corner. It looked like a shabbier version of the room of any bright classmate at the Solly School. Except there was more space without a bed. She walked over to the computer screen. Hey, you working on Boesque equations? On an application of them? To what? Fish migration patterns. Lisha smiled. Yeah, that would work. I never thought of that. Richard seemed not to know what to do with her smile. He looked at the wall, then at her chin. You interested in geopatterns? In the environment? Well, no, Lisha confessed. Not particularly. I'm going to study politics at Harvard, pre-law. But of course we had geopatterns at school. Richard's gaze finally came unstuck from her face. He ran a hand through his dark hair. Sit down if you want. Lisha sat, looking appreciatively at the wall posters, shifting green on blue like ocean currents. I like those. Did you program them yourself? You're not at all what I pictured, Richard said. How did you picture me? He didn't hesitate. Stuck up, superior, shallow despite your IQ. She was more hurt than she had expected to be. Richard blurted. You're one of only two Sleepless who are really rich. You and Jennifer Sharifi. But you already know that. No, I don't. I've never checked. He took the chair beside her, stretching his stocky legs straight in front of him, in a slouch that had nothing to do with relaxation. It makes sense, really. Rich people don't have their children genetically modified to be superior. They think any offspring of theirs is already superior, by their values, and poor people can't afford it. We Sleepless are upper middle class, no more. Children of professors, scientists, people who value brains and time. My father values brains and time, Lisha said. He's the biggest supporter of Kenzo Yagai. Oh, Lisha, do you think I don't already know that? Are you flashing me or what? Lisha said with great deliberateness. I'm talking to you. But the next minute she could feel the hurt break through on her face. I'm sorry, Richard muttered. He shot off his chair and paced to the computer and back. I am sorry, but I don't understand what you're doing here. I'm lonely, Lisha said, astonished at herself. She looked up at him. It's true. I'm lonely. I am. I have friends and Daddy and Alice, but no one really knows, really understands. What? I don't know what I'm saying. Richard smiled. The smile changed his whole face, opened up its dark planes to the light. I do. Oh, do I? What do you do when they say I had such a dream last night? Yes, Lisha said. But that's even really minor. It's when I say, I'll look that up for you tonight, and they get that funny look on their face that means she'll do it while I'm asleep. But that's even really minor, Richard said. It's when you're playing basketball in the gym after supper, and then you go to the diner for food, and then you say, let's have a walk by the lake, and they say, I'm really tired. I'm going home to bed now. But that's really minor, Lisha said, jumping up. It's when you really are absorbed by the movie, and then you get the point, and it's so goddamn beautiful, you leap up and say, yes, yes, and Susan says, Lisha, really? You'd think nobody but you ever enjoyed anything before. Who's Susan? Richard said. The mood was broken, but not really. Lisha could say, my stepmother, without much discomfort over what Susan had promised to be and what she had become. Richard stood inches from her, smiling that joyous smile, understanding, and suddenly relief washed over Lisha so strong that she walked straight over to him and put her arms around his neck, only tightening them when she felt his startled jerk. She started to sob. She, Lisha, who never cried. Hey, Richard said, hey. Brilliant, Lisha said, laughing. Brilliant remark. She could feel his embarrassed smile. Want to see my fish migration curves instead? No, Lisha sobbed, and he went on holding her, patting her back awkwardly, telling her without words that she was home. Camden waited up for her, although it was past midnight. He had been smoking heavily. Through the blue air, he said quietly, Did you have a good time, Lisha? Yes. I'm glad, he said, and put out his last cigarette and climbed the stairs, slowly, stiffly. He was nearly 70 now. To bed. They went everywhere together for nearly a year, swimming, dancing, the museums, the theater, the library. Richard introduced her to the others, a group of 12 kids between 14 and 19, all of them intelligent and eager, all sleepless. Lisha learned. Tony and Davino's parents, like her own, had divorced, but Tony, 14, lived with his mother, who had not particularly wanted a sleepless child, while his father, who had acquired a red sports car and a young girlfriend who designed ergonomic chairs in Paris. Tony was not allowed to tell anyone, relatives, schoolmates, that he was sleepless. "They'll think you're a freak," his mother said, eyes averted from her son's face. The one time Tony disobeyed her and told a friend that he never slept, his mother beat him. Then she moved the family to a new neighborhood. He was 9 years old. Janine Carter, almost as long-legged and slim as Lisha, was training for the Olympics in ice skating. She practiced 12 hours a day, hours no sleeper still in high school could ever have. So far, the newspapers had not picked up the story. Janine was afraid that if they did, they would somehow not let her compete. Jack Bellingham, like Lisha, would start college in September. Unlike Lisha, he had already started his career. The practice of law had to wait for law school. The practice of investing required only money. Jack didn't have much, but his precise financial analyses parlayed $600 saved from summer jobs to $3,000 through stock market investing, then to $10,000, and then he had enough to qualify for information fund speculation. Jack was 15, not old enough to make legal investments. The transactions were all in the name of Kevin Baker, the oldest of the Sleepless, who lived in Austin. Jack told Lisha, "When I hit 84% profit over 2 consecutive quarters, the data analysts logged on to me," Jack said. "Just sniffing. Well, that's their job, even when the overall amounts are actually small. It's the patterns they care about. If they take the trouble to cross-reference databanks and come up with the fact that Kevin is a sleepless, will they try to stop us from investing somehow?" "That's paranoid," Lisha said. "No, it's not," Janine said. "Lisha, you don't know." "You mean because I've been protected by my father's money and caring?" Lisha said. No one grimaced. All of them confronted ideas openly, without shadowy illusions, without dreams. "Yes," Janine said. "Your father sounds terrific, and he raised you to think that achievement should not be fettered. Jesus Christ, he's a Yogaist. Well, good, we're glad for you." She said it without sarcasm. Lisha nodded. "But the world isn't always like that. They hate us." "That's too strong," Carol said. "Not hate." "Well, maybe," Janine said. "But they're different from us. We're better, and they naturally resent that." "I don't see what's natural about it," Tony said. "Why shouldn't it be just as natural to admire what's better? We do. Does any one of us resent Kenzo Yagai for his genius? Or Nelson Wade, the physicist? Or Catherine Radusky? We don't resent them because we are better," Richard said. QED. "What we should do is have our own society," Tony said. "Why should we allow their regulations to restrict our natural, honest achievements? Why should Janine be barred from skating against them and Jack from investing on their same terms just because we're sleepless? Some of them are brighter than others of them. Some have greater persistence. Well, we have greater concentration, more biochemical stability, and more time. All men are not created equal." "Be fair, Jack. No one has been barred from anything yet," Janine said. "But we will be." "Wait," Lisha said. She was deeply troubled by the conversation. "I mean, yes, in many ways we're better. But you quoted out of context, Tony. The Declaration of Independence doesn't say all men are created equal in ability. It's talking about rights and power. It means that all are created equal under the law. We have no more right to a separate society or to being free of society's restrictions than anyone else does. There's no other way to freely trade one's efforts unless the same contractual rules apply to all." "Spoken like a true Yogaist," Richard said, squeezing her hand. "That's enough intellectual discussion for me," Carol said, laughing. "We've been at this for hours. We're at the beach, for Christ's sake. Who wants to swim with me?" "I do," Janine said. "Come on, Jack." All of them rose, brushing sand off their suits, discarding sunglasses. Richard pulled Lisha to her feet, but just before they ran into the water, Tony put his skinny hand on her arm. "One more question, Lisha, just to think about. If we achieve better than most other people, and if we trade with the sleepers, when it's mutually beneficial, making no distinction there between the strong and the weak, what obligation do we have to those so weak they don't have anything to trade with us? We're already going to give more than we get. Do we have to do it when we get nothing at all? Do we have to take care of their deformed and handicapped and sick and lazy and shiftless with the products of our work?" "Do the sleepers have to?" Lisha countered. "Kenzo Yagai would say no. He's a sleeper. He would say they would receive the benefits of contractual trade even if they aren't direct parties to the contract. The whole world is better fed and healthier because of Y energy." "Come on," Janine yelled. "Lisha, they're ducking me. Jack, you stop that. Lisha, help me." Lisha laughed. Just before she grabbed for Janine, she caught the look on Richard's face and on Tony's. Richard, frankly lustful. Tony, angry. At her. But why? What had she done? Except argue in favor of dignity and trade. Then Jack threw water on her, and Carol pushed Jack into the warm spray, and Richard was there with his arms around her, laughing. When she got the water out of her eyes, Tony was gone. Midnight. Okay, Carol said. Who's first? The 6 teenagers in the brambly clearing looked at each other. A Y lamp, kept on low for atmosphere, cast weird shadows across their faces and over their bare legs. Around the clearing, Roger Camden's trees stood thick and dark, a wall between them and the closest of the estate's outbuildings. It was very hot. August air hung heavy, sullen. They had voted against bringing an air-conditioned Y field because this was a return to the primitive, the dangerous. Let it be primitive. 6 pairs of eyes stared at the glass in Carol's hand. Come on, she said. Who wants to drink up? Her voice was jaunty, theatrically hard. It was difficult enough to get this. How did you get it? Said Richard, the group member, except for Tony, with the least influential family contacts, the least money. In a drinkable form like that. Jennifer got it, Carol said. And 5 sets of eyes shifted to Jennifer Sharifi, who 2 weeks into her first visit with Carol's family was confusing them all. She was the American-born daughter of a Hollywood movie star and an Arab prince who had wanted to found a sleepless dynasty. The movie star was an aging drug addict. The prince, who had taken his fortune out of oil and put it into Y Energy when Kenzo Yagai was still licensing his first patents, was dead. Jennifer Sharifi was richer than Lisha would someday be, and infinitely more sophisticated about procuring things. The glass held interleukin-1, an immune system booster, one of many substances which as a side effect induced the brain to swift and deep sleep. Lisha stared at the glass. A warm feeling crept through her lower belly, not unlike the feeling when she and Richard made love. She caught Jennifer watching her and flushed. Jennifer disturbed her. Not for the obvious reasons she disturbed Tony and Richard and Jack. The long black hair, the tall, slim body in shorts and halter. Jennifer didn't laugh. Lisha had never met a sleepless who didn't laugh, nor one who said so little with such deliberate casualness. Lisha found herself speculating on what Jennifer Sharifi wasn't saying. It was an odd sensation to feel toward another sleepless. Tony said to Carol, "Give it to me." Carol handed him the glass. "Remember, you only need a little sip." Tony raised the glass to his mouth, stopped, and looked at them over the rim from his fierce eyes. He drank. Carol took back the glass. They all watched Tony. Within a minute, he lay on the rough ground. Within 2, his eyes closed in sleep. It wasn't like seeing parents sleep, siblings, friends. It was Tony. They looked away, avoided each other's eyes. Lisha felt the warmth between her legs tug and tingle, faintly obscene. She didn't look at Jennifer. When it was Lisha's turn, she drank slowly, then passed the glass to Richard. Her head turned heavy, as if it were being stuffed with damp rags. The trees at the edge of the clearing blurred. The portable lamp blurred too. It wasn't bright and clean anymore, but squishy, blobby. If she touched it, it would smear. Then darkness swooped over her brain, taking it away. Taking away her mind. "Daddy," she tried to call, to clutch for him, but then the darkness obliterated her. Afterward, they all had headaches. Dragging themselves back through the woods in the thin morning light was torture, compounded by an odd shame. They didn't touch each other. Lisha walked as far away from Richard as she could. Jennifer was the only one who spoke. "So, now we know," she said, and her voice held a strange satisfaction. It was a whole day before the throbbing left the base of Lisha's skull, or the nausea her stomach. She sat alone in her room, waiting for the misery to pass, and despite the heat, her whole body shivered. There had not even been any dreams. "I want you to come with me tonight," Lisha said, for the 10th or 12th time. "We both leave for college in just 2 days. This is the last chance. I really want you to meet Richard." Alice lay on her stomach across her bed. Her hair, brown and lusterless, fell around her face. She wore an expensive yellow jumpsuit, silk by Ann Patterson, which rucked up around her knees. "Why? What do you care if I meet Richard or not?" "Because you're my sister," Lisha said. She knew better than to say, "my twin." Nothing got Alice angry faster. "I don't want to." The next moment, Alice's face changed. "Oh, I'm sorry, Lisha. I didn't mean to sound so snotty, but I don't want to." It won't be all of them, just Richard, and just for an hour or so. Then you can come back here and pack for Northwestern. I'm not going to Northwestern. Lisha stared at her. Alice said, I'm pregnant. Lisha sat on the bed. Alice rolled onto her back, brushed the hair out of her eyes, and laughed. Lisha's ears closed against the sound. Look at you, Alice said. You'd think it was you who was pregnant. But you never would be, would you, Lisha? Not until it was the proper time. Not you. How? Lisha said. We both had our caps put in. I had the cap removed, Alice said. You wanted to get pregnant? Damn flash I did. And there's not a thing Daddy can do about it. Except, of course, cut off all credit completely. But I don't think he'll do that, do you? She laughed again. Even to me? But Alice, why? Not just to anger Daddy. No, Alice said. Although you would think of that, wouldn't you? Because I want something to love. Something of my own. Something that has nothing to do with this house. Lisha thought of herself and Alice running through the conservatory years ago. Her and Alice darting in and out of the sunlight. It hasn't been so bad growing up in this house. Lisha, you're stupid. I don't know how anyone so smart can be so stupid. Get out of my room. Get out. But Alice, a baby. Get out, Alice shrieked. Go to Harvard. Go be successful. Just get out. Lisha jerked off the bed. Gladly. You're irrational, Alice. You don't think ahead. You don't plan. A baby? But she could never sustain anger. It dribbled away, leaving her mind empty. She looked at Alice, who suddenly put out her arms. Lisha went into them. You're the baby, Alice said wonderingly. You are. You're so... I don't know what. You're a baby. Lisha said nothing. Alice's arms felt warm, felt whole, felt like two children running in and out of sunlight. I'll help you, Alice, if Daddy won't. Alice abruptly pushed her away. I don't need your help. Alice stood. Lisha rubbed her empty arms, fingertips scraping across opposite elbows. Alice kicked the empty, open trunk in which she was supposed to pack for Northwestern, and then abruptly smiled a smile that made Lisha look away. She braced herself for more abuse. But what Alice said very softly was, have a good time at Harvard. 5. She loved it. From the first sight of Massachusetts Hall, older than the United States by a half-century, Lisha felt something that had been missing in Chicago. Age, roots, tradition. She touched the bricks of Widener Library, the glass cases in the Peabody Museum, as if they were the Grail. She had never been particularly sensitive to myth or drama. The anguish of Juliet seemed to her artificial, that of Willy Loman merely wasteful. Only King Arthur, struggling to create a better social order, had interested her. But now, walking under the huge autumn trees, she suddenly caught a glimpse of a force that could span generations. Fortunes left to endow learning and achievement the benefactors would never see. Individual efforts spanning and shaping centuries to come. She stopped and looked at the sky through the leaves, at the buildings solid with purpose. At such moments, she thought of Camden, bending the will of an entire genetic research institute to create her in the image he wanted. Within a month, she had forgotten all such mega-musings. The workload was incredible, even for her. The Sawley School had encouraged individual exploration at her own pace. Harvard knew what it wanted from her at its pace. In the past 20 years, under the academic leadership of a man who in his youth had watched Japanese economic domination with dismay, Harvard had become the controversial leader of a return to hard-edged learning of facts, theories, applications, problem-solving, and intellectual efficiency. The school accepted one of every 200 applicants from around the world. The daughter of England's prime minister had flunked out her first year and been sent home. Lisha had a single room in a new dormitory. The dorm because she had spent so many years isolated in Chicago and was hungry for people. The single, so she would not disturb anyone else when she worked all night. Her second day, a boy from down the hall sauntered in and perched on the edge of her desk. So, you're Lisha Camden. Yes. 16 years old. Almost 17. Going to outperform us all, I understand, without even trying. Lisha's smile faded. The boy stared at her from under lowered, downy brows. He was smiling, his eyes sharp. From Richard and Tony and the others, Lisha had learned to recognize the anger that presents itself as contempt. Yes, Lisha said coolly. I am. Are you sure? With your pretty little girl hair and your mutant little girl brain? Oh, leave her alone, Hannaway, said another voice. A tall blonde boy, so thin his ribs looked like ripples in brown sand, stood in jeans and bare feet, drying his wet hair. Don't you ever get tired of walking around being an asshole? Do you? Hannaway said. He heaved himself off the desk and started toward the door. The blonde moved out of his way. Lisha moved into it. The reason I'm going to do better than you, she said, evenly, is because I have certain advantages you don't, including sleeplessness. And then after I outperform you, I'll be glad to help you study for your tests so that you can pass too. The blonde, drying his ears, laughed, but Hannaway stood still, and into his eyes came an expression that made Lisha back away. He pushed past her and stormed out. Nice going, Camden, the blonde said. He deserved that. But I meant it, Lisha said. I will help him study. The blonde lowered his towel and stared. You did, didn't you? You meant it. Yes. Why does everybody keep questioning that? Well, the boy said, I don't. You can help me if I get into trouble. Suddenly he smiled. But I won't. Why not? Because I'm just as good at anything as you are, Lisha Camden. She studied him. You're not one of us, not Sleepless. Don't have to be. I know what I can do. Do, be, create, trade. She said, delighted, You're a Yogaius. Of course. He held out his hand. Stuart Sutter. How about a fish burger in the yard? Great, Lisha said. They walked out together, talking excitedly. When people stared at her, she tried not to notice. She was here at Harvard, with space ahead of her, time to learn, and with people like Stuart Sutter, who accepted and challenged her. All the hours he was awake. She became totally absorbed in her classwork. Roger Camden drove up once, walking the campus with her, listening, smiling. He was more at home than Lisha would have expected. He knew Stuart Sutter's father and Kate Adams's grandfather. They talked about Harvard, business, Harvard, the Yagai Economics Institute, Harvard. How's Alice? Lisha asked once, but Camden said he didn't know. She had moved out and did not want to see him. He made her an allowance through his attorney. While he said this, his face remained serene. Lisha went to the homecoming ball with Stuart, who was also majoring in pre-law but was 2 years ahead of Lisha. She took a weekend trip to Paris with Kate Adams and 2 other girlfriends, taking the Concorde 3. She had a fight with Stuart over whether the metaphor of superconductivity could apply to Yagaism. A stupid fight they both knew was stupid, but had anyway, and afterward they became lovers. After the fumbling sexual explorations with Richard, Stuart was deft, experienced, smiling faintly as he taught her how to have an orgasm both by herself and with him. Lisha was dazzled. It's so joyful, she said, and Stuart looked at her with a tenderness she knew was part disturbance, but didn't know why. At mid-semester, she had the highest grades in the freshman class. She got every answer right on every single question on her midterms. She and Stuart went out for a beer to celebrate, and when they came back, Lisha's room had been destroyed. The computer was smashed, the databanks wiped, hard copies and books smoldered in a metal wastebasket. Her clothes were ripped to pieces, her desk and bureau hacked apart. The only thing untouched, pristine, was the bed. Stuart said, There's no way this could have been done in silence. Everyone on the floor, hell, on the floor below, had to know. Someone will talk to the police. No one did. Lisha sat on the edge of the bed, dazed, and looked at the remnants of her homecoming gown. The next day, Dave Hannaway gave her a long, wide smile. Camden flew east, taut with rage. He rented her an apartment in Cambridge with E-lock security and a bodyguard named Toshio. After he left, Lisha fired the bodyguard, but kept the apartment. It gave her and Stuart more privacy, which they used to endlessly discuss the situation. It was Lisha who argued that it was an aberration, an immaturity. There have always been haters, Stuart. Hate Jews, hate blacks, hate immigrants, hate Yagaists, who have more initiative and dignity than you do. I'm just the latest object of hatred. It's not new. It's not remarkable. It doesn't mean any basic kind of schism between the sleepless and sleepers. Stuart sat up in bed and reached for the sandwiches on the nightstand. Doesn't it? Lisha, you're a different kind of person entirely, more evolutionarily fit, not only to survive, but to prevail. Those other objects of hatred you cite, they were all powerless in their societies. They occupied inferior positions. You, on the other hand, all 3 Sleepless in Harvard Law, are on the law review. All of them. Kevin Baker, your oldest, has already founded a successful biointerface software firm and is making money, a lot of it. Every Sleepless is making superb grades. None have psychological problems, all are healthy, and most of you aren't even adults yet. How much hatred do you think you're going to encounter once you hit the high-stakes world of finance and business, and scarce endowed chairs, and national politics? Give me a sandwich, Lisha said. Here's my evidence you're wrong. You yourself, Kenzo Yagai, Kate Adams, Professor Lane, my father, every sleeper who inhabits the world of fair trade and mutually beneficial contracts. And that's most of you, or at least most of you who are worth considering. You believe that competition among the most capable leads to the most beneficial trades for everyone, strong and weak. Sleepless are making real and concrete contributions to society in a lot of fields. That has to outweigh the discomfort we cause. We're valuable to you. You know that. Stewart brushed crumbs off the sheets. Yes, I do. Yagaists do. Yagaists run the business and financial and academic worlds, or they will. In a meritocracy, they should. You underestimate the majority of people, Stu. Ethics aren't confined to the ones out front. I hope you're right, Stewart said. Because, you know, I'm in love with you. Lisha put down her sandwich. Joy, Stewart mumbled into her breasts. You are joy. When Lisha went home for Thanksgiving, she told Richard about Stewart. He listened, tight-lipped. A sleeper. A person, Lisha said. A good, intelligent, achieving person. Do you know what your good, intelligent, achieving sleepers have done, Lisha? Janine has been barred from Olympic skating. Genetic alteration analogous to steroid abuse to create an unsportsmanlike advantage. Chris Devereaux has left Stanford. They trashed his laboratory, destroyed 2 years' work in memory formation proteins. Kevin Baker's software company is fighting a nasty advertising campaign, all underground, of course, about kids using software designed by non-human minds. Corruption, mental slavery, satanic influences, the whole bag of witch hunt tricks. Wake up, Lisha. They both heard his words. Minutes dragged by. Richard stood like a boxer, forward on the balls of his feet, teeth clenched. Finally, he said very quietly, Do you love him? Yes, Lisha said. I'm sorry. Your choice, Richard said coldly. What do you do while he's asleep? Watch? You make it sound like a perversion. Richard said nothing. Lisha drew a deep breath. She spoke rapidly, but calmly, a controlled rush. While Stewart is asleep, I work, the same as you do. Richard, don't do this. I didn't mean to hurt you, and I don't want to lose the group. I believe the sleepers are the same species as we are. Are you going to punish me for that? Are you going to add to the hatred? Are you going to tell me that I can't belong to a wider world that includes all honest, worthwhile people, whether they sleep or not? Are you going to tell me that the most important division is by genetics and not by economic spirituality? Are you going to force me into an artificial choice, us or them? Richard picked up a bracelet. Lisha recognized it. She had given it to him in the summer. His voice was quiet. No, it's not a choice. He played with the gold links a minute, then looked at her. Not yet. By spring break, Camden walked more slowly. He took medicine for his blood pressure, his heart. He and Susan, he told Lisha, were getting a divorce. She changed, Lisha, after I married her. You saw that. She was independent and productive and happy. And then after a few years, she stopped all that and became a shrew. A whining shrew. He shook his head in genuine bewilderment. You saw the change. Lisha had. A memory came to her. Susan leading her and Alice in games that were actually controlled cerebral performance tests. Susan's braids dancing around her sparkling eyes. Alice had loved Susan then, as much as Lisha had. Dad, I want Alice's address. I told you up at Harvard I don't have it, Camden said. He shifted in his chair, the impatient gesture of a body that never expected to wear out. In January, Kenzo Yagai had died of pancreatic cancer. Camden had taken the news hard. I make her allowance through an attorney, by her choice. Then I want the address of the attorney. The attorney, a quenched-looking man named John Jaworski, refused to tell Lisha where Alice was. She doesn't want to be found, Ms. Camden. She wanted a complete break. Not from me, Lisha said. Yes, Jaworski said, and something flickered in his eyes, something she had last seen in Dave Hanaway's face. She flew to Austin before returning to Boston, making her a day late for classes. Kevin Baker saw her instantly, canceling a meeting with IBM. She told him what she needed, and he set his best DataNet people on it, without telling them why. Within 2 hours, she had Alice's address from Jaworski's electronic files. It was the first time, she realized, that she had ever turned to one of the Sleepless for help, and it had been given instantly, without trade. Alice was in Pennsylvania. The next weekend, Lisha rented a hovercar and driver. She had learned to drive, but only ground cars as yet, and went to High Ridge in the Appalachian Mountains. It was an isolated hamlet 25 miles from the nearest hospital. Alice lived with a man named Ed, a silent carpenter 20 years older than her, in a cabin in the woods. The cabin had water and electricity, but no news net. In the early spring light, the earth was raw and bare, slashed with icy gullies. Alice and Ed apparently worked at nothing. Alice was 8 months pregnant. "I didn't want you here," she said to Lisha. "So why are you?" "Because you're my sister." "God, look at you. Is that what they're wearing at Harvard? Boots like that? When did you become fashionable, Lisha? You were always too busy being intellectual to care." "What's this all about, Alice? Why here? What are you doing?" "Living," Alice said. "Away from dear Daddy. Away from Chicago. Away from drunken, broken Susan. Did you know she drinks? Just like Mom. He does that to people, but not to me. I got out. I wonder if you ever will." "Got out? To this?" "I'm happy," Alice said angrily. "Isn't that what it's supposed to be about? Isn't that the aim of your great Kenzoya guy? Happiness through individual effort?" Lisha thought of saying that Alice was making no efforts that she could see. She didn't say it. A chicken ran through the yard of the cabin. Behind, the mountains rose in layer upon layer of blue haze. Lisha thought what this place must have been like in winter, cut off from the world, where people strived toward goals, learned, changed. "I'm glad you're happy, Alice." "Are you?" "Yes." "Then I'm glad too," Alice said, almost defiantly. The next moment she abruptly hugged Lisha, fiercely, the huge, hard mound of her belly crushed between them. Alice's hair smelled sweet, like fresh grass in sunlight. "I'll come see you again, Alice." "Don't," Alice said. 6. "Sleepless Mutie begs for reversal of gene tampering," screamed the headline in a food mart. "Please let me sleep like real people," child pleads. Lisha typed in her credit number and pressed the news kiosk for a printout, although ordinarily she ignored the electronic tabloids. The headline went on, circling the kiosk. A Food Mart employee stopped stacking boxes on shelves and watched her. Bruce, Lisha's bodyguard, watched the employee. She was 22. In her final year at Harvard Law, editor of the Law Review, clearly first in her graduating class. The closest 3 contenders were Jonathan Cochiara, Len Carter, and Martha Wentz, all sleepless. In her apartment, she skimmed the printout. Then she accessed the GroupNet run from Austin. The files had more news stories about the child with comments from other sleepless, but before she could call them up, Kevin Baker came online himself on voice. "Lisha, I'm glad you called. I was going to call you. What's the situation with this Stella Bevington, Kev? Has anybody checked it out?" "Randy Davies. He's from Chicago, but I don't think you've met him. He's still in high school. He's in Park Ridge. Stella's in Skokie. Her parents wouldn't talk to him. They were pretty abusive, in fact. But he got to see Stella face to face anyway. It doesn't look like an abuse case, just the usual stupidity. Parents wanted a genius child, scrimped and saved, and now they can't handle that she is one. They scream at her to sleep, get emotionally abusive when she contradicts them, but so far no violence. Is the emotional abuse actionable? I don't think we want to move on it yet. 2 of us will keep in close touch with Stella. She does have a modem, and she hasn't told her parents about the net. And Randy will drive out weekly." Lisha bit her lip. "A tabloid shit piece said she's 7 years old." "Yes. Maybe she shouldn't be left there. I'm an Illinois resident. I can file an abuse grievance from here if Candy's got too much in her briefcase." 7 years old. "No, let it sit a while. Stella will probably be all right. You know that." She did. Nearly all of the sleepless stayed all right, no matter how much opposition came from the stupid segment of society. And it was only the stupid segment, Lisha argued, a small, if vocal minority. Most people could and would adjust to the growing presence of the sleepless, when it became clear that that presence included not only growing power, but growing benefits to the country as a whole. Kevin Baker, now 26, had made a fortune in microchips, so revolutionary that artificial intelligence, once a debated dream, was yearly closer to reality. Carolyn Rizzolo had won the Pulitzer Prize in drama for her play Morning Light. She was 24. Jeremy Robinson had done significant work in superconductivity applications while still a graduate student at Stanford. William Thane, law review editor when Lisha first came to Harvard, was now in private practice. He had never lost a case. He was 26, and the cases were becoming important. His clients valued his ability more than his age. But not everyone reacted that way. Kevin Baker and Richard Keller had started a data net that bound the Sleepless into a tight group, constantly aware of each other's personal fights. Lisha Camden financed the legal battles, the educational costs of Sleepless whose parents were unable to meet them, the support of children in emotionally bad situations. Rhonda Lavalier got herself licensed as a foster mother in California, and whenever possible, the group maneuvered to have young Sleepless who were removed from their homes assigned to Rhonda. The group now had 3 licensed lawyers. Within the next year, it would gain 4 more, licensed to practice in 5 different states. The one time they had not been able to remove an abused, sleepless child legally, they kidnapped him. Timmy DiMarzo, 4 years old. Lisha had been opposed to the action. She had argued the case morally and pragmatically. To her, they were the same thing. Thus, if they believed in their society, in its fundamental laws, and in their ability to belong to it as free-trading productive individuals, they must remain bound by the society's contractual laws. The Sleepless were, for the most part, Yagaists. They should already know this. And if the FBI caught them, the courts and press would crucify them. They were not caught. Timmy DiMarzo, not even old enough to call for help on the data net, they had learned of the situation through the automatic police record scan Kevin maintained through his company, was stolen from his own backyard in Wichita. He had lived the last year in an isolated trailer in North Dakota. No place was too isolated for a modem. He was cared for by a legally irreproachable foster mother who had lived there all her life. The foster mother was second cousin to a Sleepless, a broad, cheerful woman with a much better brain than her appearance indicated. She was a Yagaiist. No record of the child's existence appeared in any databank. Not the IRS, not any schools, not even the local grocery store's computerized checkout slips. Food specifically for the child was shipped in monthly on a truck owned by a Sleepless in State College, Pennsylvania. 10 of the group knew about the kidnapping, out of the total 3,428 Sleepless born in the United States. Of those, 2,691 were part of the group via the net. An additional 701 were as yet too young to use a modem. Only 36 Sleepless, for whatever reason, were not part of the group. The kidnapping had been arranged by Tony Indovino. "It's Tony I wanted to talk to you about," Kevin said to Lisha. He started again. "This time he means it. He's buying land." She folded the tabloid very small and laid it carefully on the table. "Where?" "Allegheny Mountains. In southern New York State. A lot of land. He's putting in the roads now. In the spring, the first buildings." "Jennifer Sharifi still financing it?" It had been 6 years since the interleukin drinking in the woods, but the evening remained vivid to Lisha. So did Jennifer Sharifi. "Yes, she's got the money to do it. Tony's starting to get a following, Lisha." "I know." "Call him." "I will. Keep me informed about Stella." She worked until midnight at the law review, then until 4 o'clock a.m. preparing her classes. From 4 to 5, she handled legal matters for the group. At 5 o'clock a.m., she called Tony, still in Chicago. He had finished high school, done 1 semester at Northwestern, and at Christmas vacation had finally exploded at his mother for forcing him to live as a sleeper. The explosion, it seemed, to Lisha, had never ended. "Tony? Lisha." "The answer is yes, yes, no, and go to hell." Lisha gritted her teeth. "Fine, now tell me the questions. Are you really serious about the Sleepless withdrawing into their own self-sufficient society? Is Jennifer Sharifi willing to finance a project the size of building a small city? Don't you think that's a cheat of all that can be accomplished by patient integration of the group into the mainstream? And what about the contradictions of living in an armed, restricted city and still trading with the outside?" "I would never tell you to go to hell." "Hooray for you," Tony said. After a moment he added, "I'm sorry, that sounds like one of them." "It's wrong for us, Tony." "Thanks for not saying I couldn't pull it off." She wondered if he could. "We're not a separate species, Tony." "Tell that to the sleepers." "You exaggerate. There are haters out there. There are always haters. But to give up." "We're not giving up. Whatever we create can be freely traded. Software, hardware, novels, information, theories, legal counsel. We can travel in and out, but we'll have a safe place to return to, without the leeches who think we owe them blood because we're better than they are." "It isn't a matter of owing." "Really?" Tony said. "Let's have this out, Lisha, all the way. You're a Yagaiist. What do you believe in?" "Tony..." "Do it," Tony said, and in his voice she heard the 14-year-old she had been introduced to by Richard. Simultaneously, she saw her father's face, not as he was now since the bypass, but as he had been when she was a little girl, holding her on his lap to explain that she was special. I believe in voluntary trade that is mutually beneficial, that spiritual dignity comes from supporting one's life through one's own efforts, and from trading the results of those efforts in mutual cooperation throughout the society. That the symbol of this is the contract, and that we need each other for the fullest, most beneficial trade. Fine, Tony bit off. Now, what about the beggars in Spain? The what? You walk down a street in a poor country like Spain, and you see a beggar. Do you give him $1? Probably. Why? He's trading nothing with you. He has nothing to trade. I know, out of kindness, compassion. You see 6 beggars. Do you give them all $1? Probably, Lisha said. You would. You see 100 beggars, and you haven't got Lisha Camden's money. Do you give them each $1? No. Why not? Lisha reached for patience. Few people could make her want to cut off a comlink. Tony was one of them. Too draining on my own resources. My life has first claim on the resources I earn. All right. Now consider this. At Biotech Institute, where you and I began, dear pseudo-sister, Dr. Melling has just yesterday... Who? Dr. Susan Melling. Oh, God, I completely forgot. She used to be married to your father. I lost track of her, Lisha said. I didn't realize she'd gone back to research. Alice once said... Never mind. What's going on at Biotech? 2 crucial items just released. Carla Dutcher has had first-month fetal genetic analysis. Sleeplessness is a dominant gene. The next generation of the group won't sleep either. We all knew that, Lisha said. Carla Dutcher was the world's first pregnant sleepless. Her husband was a sleeper. The whole world expected that. But the press will have a field day with it anyway. Just watch. Muties breed. New race set to dominate next generation of children. Lisha didn't deny it. And the second item? It's sad, Lisha. We've just had our first death. Her stomach tightened. Who? Bernie Kuhn, Seattle. She didn't know him. A car accident. It looks pretty straightforward. He lost control on a steep curve when his brakes failed. He had only been driving a few months. He was 17. But the significance here is that his parents have donated his brain and body to Biotech, in conjunction with the pathology department at the Chicago Medical School. They're going to take him apart to get the first good look at what prolonged sleeplessness does to the body and brain. They should, Lisha said. That poor kid. But what are you so afraid they'll find? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. But whatever it is, if the haters can use it against us, they will. You're paranoid, Tony. Impossible. The sleepless have personalities calmer and more reality-oriented than the norm. Don't you read the literature? Tony, what if you walk down that street in Spain, and 100 beggars each want $1, and you say no, and they have nothing to trade you, but they're so rotten with anger about what you have that they knock you down and grab it, and then beat you out of sheer envy and despair? Lisha didn't answer. Are you going to say that's not a human scenario, Lisha? That it never happens? It happens, Lisha said evenly, but not all that often. Bullshit. Read more history. Read more newspapers. But the point is, what do you owe the beggars then? What does good Yagaiist who believes in mutually beneficial contracts do with people who have nothing to trade and can only take? You're not... What, Lisha? In the most objective terms you can manage, what do we owe the grasping and non-productive needy? What I said originally, kindness, compassion. Even if they don't trade it back? Why? Because... She stopped. Why? Why do law-abiding and productive human beings owe anything to those who neither produce very much nor abide by just laws? What philosophical or economic or spiritual justification is there for owing them anything? Be as honest as I know you are. Lisha put her head between her knees. The question gaped beneath her, but she didn't try to evade it. I don't know. I just know we do. Why? She didn't answer. After a moment, Tony did. The intellectual challenge was gone from his voice. He said, almost tenderly, come down in the spring and see the site for sanctuary. The buildings will be going up then. No, Lisha said. I'd like you to. No, armed retreat is not the way. Tony said, the beggars are getting nastier, Lisha, as the sleepless grow richer. And I don't mean in money. Tony, she said, and stopped. She couldn't think what to say. Don't walk down too many streets armed with just the memory of Kenzo Yagai. In March, a bitterly cold March, with wind whipping down the Charles River, Richard Keller came to Cambridge. Lisha had not seen him for 3 years. He didn't send her word on the group net that he was coming. She hurried up the walk to her townhouse, muffled to the eyes in a red wool scarf against the snowy cold, and he stood there, blocking the doorway. Behind Lisha, her bodyguard tensed. "Richard!" "Bruce, it's all right. This is an old friend." "Hello, Lisha." He was heavier, sturdier looking, with a breadth of shoulder she didn't recognize. But the face was Richard's, older but unchanged. Dark, low brows, unruly dark hair. He had grown a beard. "You look beautiful," he said. Inside, she handed him a cup of coffee. "Are you here on business?" From the group net, she knew that he had finished his master's and had done outstanding work in marine biology in the Caribbean, but had left that a year ago and disappeared from the net. "No, pleasure." He smiled suddenly, the old smile that opened up his dark face. "I almost forgot about that for a long time. Contentment, yes. We're all good at the contentment that comes from sustained work. But pleasure? Whim? Caprice? When was the last time you did something silly, Lisha?" She smiled. "I ate cotton candy in the shower." "Really? Why?" "To see if it would dissolve in gooey pink patterns." "Did it?" "Yes, lovely ones." "And that was your last silly thing? When was it?" "Last summer," Lisha said, and laughed. "Well, mine is sooner than that. It's now. I'm in Boston for no other reason than the spontaneous pleasure of seeing you." Lisha stopped laughing. "That's an intense tone for a spontaneous pleasure, Richard." "Yep," he said intensely. She laughed again. He didn't. "I've been in India, Lisha, and China, and Africa. Thinking mostly. Watching. First I traveled like a sleeper, attracting no attention. Then I set out to meet the Sleepless in India and China. There are a few, you know, whose parents were willing to come here for the operation. They pretty much are accepted and left alone. I tried to figure out why desperately poor countries, by our standards anyway, over there why energy is mostly available only in big cities, don't have any trouble accepting the superiority of Sleepless, whereas Americans, with more prosperity than any time in history, build in resentment more and more." Lisha said, "Did you figure it out?" "No. But I figured out something else, watching all those communes and villages and kampongs. We are too individualistic." Disappointment swept Lisha. She saw her father's face. Excellence is what counts, Lisha. Excellence supported by individual effort. She reached for Richard's cup. "More coffee?" He caught her wrist and looked up into her face. "Don't misunderstand me, Lisha. I'm not talking about work. We are too much individuals in the rest of our lives. Too emotionally rational. Too much alone. Isolation kills more than the free flow of ideas. It kills joy." He didn't let go of her wrist. She looked down into his eyes, into depths she hadn't seen before. It was the feeling of looking into a mine shaft, both giddy and frightening, knowing that at the bottom might be gold or darkness, or both. Richard said softly, "Stuart?" "Over long ago, an undergraduate thing." Her voice didn't sound like her own. "Kevin?" "No, never. We're just friends." I wasn't sure. "Anyone?" "No." He let go of her wrist. Lisha peered at him timidly. He suddenly laughed. "Joy, Lisha." An echo sounded in her mind, but she couldn't place it. And then it was gone, and she laughed too. A laugh airy and frothy, and pink cotton candy in summer. "Come home, Lisha. He's had another heart attack." Susan Melling's voice on the phone was tired. Lisha said, "How bad?" "The doctors aren't sure, or say they're not sure. He wants to see you. Can you leave your studies?" It was May, the last push toward her finals. The law review proofs were behind schedule. Richard had started a new business, marine consulting to Boston fishermen, plagued with sudden inexplicable shifts in ocean currents, and was working 20 hours a day. "I'll come," Lisha said. Chicago was colder than Boston. The trees were half budded. On Lake Michigan, filling the huge east windows of her father's house, white caps tossed up cold spray. Lisha saw that Susan was living in the house. Her brushes were on Camden's dresser, her journals on the credenza in the foyer. "Lisha," Camden said. He looked old, gray skin, sunken cheeks, the fretful and bewildered look of men who accepted potency like air, indivisible from their lives. In the corner of the room, on a small 18th century slipper chair, sat a short, stocky woman with brown braids. "Alice." "Hello, Lisha." "Alice, I've looked for you." The wrong thing to say. Lisha had looked, but not very hard, deterred by the knowledge that Alice had not wanted to be found. How are you? I'm fine, Alice said. She seemed remote, gentle, unlike the angry Alice of 6 years ago in the raw Pennsylvania hills. Camden moved painfully on the bed. He looked at Lisha with eyes which, she saw, were undimmed in their blue brightness. I asked Alice to come, and Susan. Susan came a while ago. I'm dying, Lisha. No one contradicted him. Lisha, knowing his respect for facts, remained silent. Love hurt her chest. John Jaworski has my will. None of you can break it. But I wanted to tell you myself what's in it. The past few years I've been selling, liquidating. Most of my holdings are accessible now. I've left 1/10 to Alice, 1/10 to Susan, 1/10 to Elizabeth, and the rest to you, Lisha. Because you're the only one with the individual ability to use the money to its full potential for achievement. Lisha looked wildly at Alice, who gazed back with her strange remote calm. Elizabeth? My mother? Is alive? Yes, Camden said. You told me she was dead, years and years ago. Yes, I thought it was better for you that way. She didn't like what you were, was jealous of what you could become, and she had nothing to give you. She would only have caused you emotional harm. Beggars in Spain. That was wrong, Daddy. You were wrong. She's my mother. She couldn't finish the sentence. Camden didn't flinch. I don't think I was, but you're an adult now. You can see her if you wish. He went on looking at her with his bright, sunken eyes, while around Lisha the air heaved and snapped. Her father had lied to her. Susan watched her closely, a small smile on her lips. Was she glad to see Camden fall in his daughter's estimation? Had she all along been that jealous of their relationship, of Lisha? She was thinking like Tony. The thought steadied her a little. But she went on staring at Camden, who went on staring back implacably, unbudged. A man positive, even on his deathbed, that he was right. Alice's hand was on her elbow. Alice's voice so soft that no one but Lisha could hear. He's done talking now, Lisha. And after a while, you'll be all right. Alice had left her son in California with her husband of 2 years, Beck Watrous, a building contractor she had met while waiting on tables in a resort on the artificial islands. Beck had adopted Jordan, Alice's son. Before Beck, there was a real bad time, Alice said in her remote voice. You know, when I was carrying Jordan, I actually used to dream that he would be sleepless, like you. Every night, I'd dream that, and every morning I'd wake up and have morning sickness, with a baby that was only going to be a stupid nothing like me. I stayed with Ed in the Appalachian Mountains, remember? You came to see me there once, for 2 more years. When he beat me, I was glad. I wish Daddy could see. At least Ed was touching me. Lisha made a sound in her throat. I finally left because I was afraid for Jordan. I went to California, did nothing but eat for a year. I got up to 190 pounds. Alice was, Lisha estimated, 5'4". Then I came home to see Mother. You didn't tell me, Lisha said. You knew she was alive and you didn't tell me. She's in a drying-out tank half the time, Alice said, with brutal simplicity. She wouldn't see you if you wanted to. But she saw me, and she fell slobbering all over me as her real daughter, and she threw up on my dress. And I backed away from her, and looked at the dress, and knew it should be thrown up on. It was so ugly, deliberately ugly. She started screaming how Dad had ruined her life, ruined mine, all for you. And do you know what I did? What? Lisha said. Her voice was shaky. I flew home, burned all my clothes, got a job, started college, lost 50 pounds, and put Jordan in play therapy. The sisters sat silent. Beyond the window, the lake was dark, unlit by moon or stars. It was Lisha who suddenly shook, and Alice who patted her shoulder. Tell me, Lisha couldn't think what she wanted to be told, except that she wanted to hear Alice's voice in the gloom. Alice's voice as it was now, gentle and remote, without damage anymore from the damaging fact of Lisha's existence, her very existence as damage. Tell me about Jordan. He's 5 now? What's he like? Alice turned her head to look levelly into Lisha's eyes. He's a happy, ordinary little boy. Completely ordinary. Camden died a week later. After the funeral, Lisha tried to see her mother at the Brookfield Drug and Alcohol Abuse Center. Elizabeth Camden, she was told, saw no one except her only child, Alice Camden Watrous. Susan Melling, dressed in black, drove Lisha to the airport. Susan talked deftly, determinedly. about Lisha's studies, about Harvard, about the law review. Lisha answered in monosyllables, but Susan persisted, asking questions, quietly insisting on answers. When would Lisha take her bar exams? Where was she interviewing for jobs? Gradually, Lisha began to lose the numbness she had felt since her father's casket was lowered into the ground. She realized that Susan's persistent questioning was a kindness. "He sacrificed a lot of people," Lisha said suddenly. "Not me," Susan said. "Only for a while there, when I gave up my work to do his. Roger didn't respect sacrifice much." "Was he wrong?" Lisha said. The question came out with a kind of desperateness she hadn't intended. Susan smiled sadly. "No, he wasn't wrong. I should never have left my research. It took me a long time to come back to myself after that." "He does that to people," Lisha heard inside her head. Susan or Alice? She couldn't, for once, remember clearly. She saw her father in the old conservatory, now empty, potting and repotting the exotic flowers he had loved. She was tired. It was muscle fatigue from stress, she knew. 20 minutes of rest would restore her. Her eyes burned from unaccustomed tears. She leaned her head back against the car seat and closed her eyes. Susan pulled the car into the airport parking lot and turned off the ignition. "There's something I want to tell you, Lisha." Lisha opened her eyes. "About the will?" Susan smiled tightly. "No. You really don't have any problems with how he divided the estate, do you? It seems reasonable to you, but that's not it. The research team from Biotech and Chicago Medical has finished its analysis of Bernie Kuhn's brain." Lisha turned to face Susan. She was startled by the complexity of Susan's expression. It held determination and satisfaction and anger, and something else Lisha could not name. Susan said, "We're going to publish next week in the New England Journal of Medicine. Security has been unbelievably restricted, no leaks to the popular press. But I want to tell you now, myself, what we found, so you'll be prepared." "Go on," Lisha said. Her chest felt tight. "Do you remember when you and the other Sleepless kids took interleukin-1 to see what sleep was like? When you were 16? How did you know about that? You kids were watched a lot more closely than you think. Remember the headache you got?" "Yes." She and Richard and Tony and Carol and Brad and Janine, after her rejection by the Olympic Committee, Janine had never skated again. She was a kindergarten teacher in Butte, Montana. "Interleukin-1 is what I want to talk about, at least partly. It's one of a whole group of substances that boost the immune system. They stimulate the production of antibodies, the activity of white blood cells, and a host of other immunoenhancements. Normal people have surges of IL-1 released during the slow-wave phases of sleep. That means that we, are getting boosts to the immune system during sleep. One of the questions we researchers asked ourselves 28 years ago was, will sleepless kids who don't get those surges of IL-1 get sick more often?" "I've never been sick," Lisha said. "Yes, you have. Chickenpox and 3 minor colds by the end of your 4th year," Susan said precisely. "But, in general, you were all a very healthy lot. So, we researchers were left with the alternate theory of sleep-driven immunoenhancement, that the burst of immune activity existed as a counterpart to a greater vulnerability of the body in sleep to disease, probably in some way connected to the fluctuations in body temperature during REM sleep. In other words, sleep caused the immune vulnerability that endogenous pyrogens like IL-1 counteracted. Sleep was the problem. Immune system enhancements were the solution. Without sleep, there would be no problem. Are you following this?" "Yes." "Of course you are. Stupid question." Susan brushed her hair off her face. It was going gray at the temples. There was a tiny brown age spot beneath her right ear. "Over the years, we collected thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, of single-photon emission tomography scans of you kids' brains, plus endless EEGs, samples of cerebrospinal fluid, and all the rest of it. But we couldn't really see inside your brains, really know what's going on in there, until Bernie Kuhn hit that embankment." "Susan," Lisha said, "give it to me straight, without more build-up. You're not going to age." "What?" "Oh, cosmetically a little. Sagging due to gravity, maybe. But the absence of sleep peptides, and all the rest of it, affects the immune and tissue restoration systems in ways we don't understand. Bernie Kuhn had a perfect liver, perfect lungs, perfect heart, perfect lymph nodes, perfect pancreas, perfect medulla oblongata. Not just healthy or young. Perfect. There's a tissue regeneration enhancement that clearly derives from the operation of the immune system, but is radically different from anything we ever suspected. Organs show no wear and tear, Not even the minimal amount expected in a 17-year-old. They just repaired themselves, perfectly. On and on. And on. For how long? Lisha whispered. Who the hell knows? Bernie Kuhn was young. Maybe there's some compensatory mechanism that cuts in at some point, and you'll all just collapse, like an entire fucking gallery of Dorian Grays. But I don't think so. Neither do I think it can go on forever. No tissue regeneration can do that. But a long, long time. Lisha stared at the blurred reflections in the car windshield. She saw her father's face against the blue satin of his casket, banked with white roses. His heart, unregenerated, had given out. Susan said, "The future is all speculative at this point. We know that the peptide structures that build up the pressure to sleep in normal people resemble the components of bacterial cell walls. Maybe there's a connection between sleep and pathogen receptivity. We don't know. But ignorance never stopped the tabloids. I want to prepare you because you're going to get called Superman, Homo Perfectus, who all knows what, immortal." The two women sat in silence. Finally, Lisha said, "I'm going to tell the others, on our datanet. Don't worry about the security. Kevin Baker designed GroupNet. Nobody knows anything we don't want them to." "You're that well organized already?" "Yes." Susan's mouth worked. She looked away from Lisha. "We'd better go in. You'll miss your flight. Susan?" "What?" "Thank you." "You're welcome," Susan said. And in her voice, Lisha heard the thing she had seen before in Susan's expression and had not been able to name. It was longing. Tissue regeneration. A long, long time, sang the blood in Lisha's ears on the flight to Boston. Tissue regeneration. And eventually, immortal. No, not that, she told herself severely. Not that. The blood didn't listen. "You sure smile a lot," said the man next to her in first class, a business traveler who had not recognized Lisha. "You coming from a big party in Chicago?" "No, from a funeral." The man looked shocked, then disgusted. Lisha looked out the window at the ground far below. Rivers like microcircuits, fields like neat index cards. And on the horizon, fluffy white clouds like masses of exotic flowers, blooms in a conservatory filled with light. The letter was no thicker than any hard-copy mail, but hard-copy mail addressed by hand to either of them was so rare that Richard was nervous. It might be explosive. Lisha looked at the letter on her hall credenza. Ms. Leisha Camden. Block letters, misspelled. "It looks like a child's writing," she said. Richard stood with head lowered, legs braced apart, but his expression was only weary. "Perhaps deliberately like a child's. You'd be more open to a child's writing, they might have figured." "They? Richard, are we getting that paranoid?" He didn't flinch from the question. "Yes, for the time being." A week earlier, the New England Journal of Medicine had published Susan's careful, sober article. An hour later, the broadcast and DataNet news had exploded in speculation, drama, outrage, and fear. Lisha and Richard, along with all the Sleepless on the GroupNet, had tracked and charted each of 4 components, looking for a dominant reaction. Speculation? The Sleepless may live for centuries, and this might lead to the following events. Drama? If a Sleepless marries only sleepers, he may have lifetime enough for a dozen brides and several dozen children, a bewildering blended family. Outrage. Tampering with the law of nature has only brought among us unnatural so-called people who live with the unfair advantage of time. Time to accumulate more kin, more power, more property than the rest of us could ever know. And fear. How soon before the super race takes over? "They're all fear, of one kind or another," Carolyn Rizzolo finally said. And the GroupNet stopped its differentiated tracking. Lisha was taking the final exams of her last year of law school. Each day, comments followed her to the campus, along the corridors, and in the classroom. Each day she forgot them, in the grueling exam sessions, in which all students were reduced to the same status of petitioner to the great university. Afterward, temporarily drained, she walked silently back home to Richard and the GroupNet, aware of the looks of people on the street, aware of her bodyguard, Bruce, striding between her and them. "It will calm down," Lisha said. Richard didn't answer. The town of Salt Springs, Texas, passed a local ordinance that no Sleepless could obtain a liquor license on the grounds that civil rights statutes were built on the all men were created equal clause of the Declaration of Independence, and Sleepless clearly were not covered. There were no Sleepless within 100 miles of Salt Springs, and no one had applied for a new liquor license there for the past 10 years, but the story was picked up by United Press and by DataNet News, and within 24 hours, heated editorials appeared on both sides of the issue across the nation. More local ordinances were passed. In Pollux, Pennsylvania, the Sleepless could be denied an apartment rental on the grounds that their prolonged wakefulness would increase both wear and tear on the landlord's property and utility bills. In Cranston Estates, California, Sleepless were barred from operating 24-hour businesses. Unfair competition. Iroquois County, New York, barred them from serving on county juries, arguing that a jury containing Sleepless, with their skewed idea of time, did not constitute a jury of one's peers. All those statutes will be thrown out in superior courts, Lisha said. But God, the waste of money and docket time to do it. A part of her mind noticed that her tone as she said this was Roger Camden's. The state of Georgia, in which some sex acts between consenting adults were still a crime, made sex between a Sleepless and a sleeper a third-degree felony, classing it with bestiality. Kevin Baker had designed software that scanned the news nets at high speed, flagged all stories involving discrimination or attacks on Sleepless, and categorized them by type. The files were available on GroupNet. Lisha read through them, then called Kevin. "Can't you create a parallel program to flag defenses of us? We're getting a skewed picture." "You're right," Kevin said, a little startled. "I didn't think of it." "Think of it," Lisha said grimly. Richard, watching her, said nothing. She was most upset by the stories about Sleepless children. Shunning at school, verbal abuse by siblings, attacks by neighborhood bullies, confused resentment from parents who had wanted an exceptional child, but had not bargained for one who might live centuries. The school board of Cold River, Iowa, voted to bar Sleepless children from conventional classrooms because their rapid learning created feelings of inadequacy in others, interfering with their education. The board made funds available for Sleepless to have tutors at home. There were no volunteers among the teaching staff. Lisha started spending as much time on GroupNet with the kids, talking to them all night long, as she did studying for her bar exams, scheduled for July. Stella Bevington stopped using her modem. Kevin's second program cataloged editorials, urging fairness toward Sleepless. The school board of Denver set aside funds for a program in which gifted children, including the Sleepless, could use their talents and build teamwork through tutoring even younger children. Rive-Beau, Louisiana, elected Sleepless Danielle Duchernay to the city council, although Danielle was 22 and technically too young to qualify. The prestigious medical research firm of Halley Hall gave much publicity to their hiring of Christopher Amron, a Sleepless with a Ph.D. in cellular physics. Dora Clark, a Sleepless in Dallas, opened a letter addressed to her, and a plastic explosive blew off her arm. Lisha and Richard stared at the envelope on the hall credenza. The paper was thick, cream-colored, but not expensive. The kind of paper made of bulky newsprint dyed the shades of vellum. There was no return address. Richard called Liz Bishop, a Sleepless who was majoring in criminal justice in Michigan. He had never spoken with her before, neither had Lisha, but she came on the GroupNet immediately and told them how to open it. Or she could fly up and do it if they preferred. Richard and Lisha followed her directions for remote detonation in the basement of the townhouse. Nothing blew up. When the letter was opened, they took it out and read it. "Dear Ms. Camden, you've been pretty good to me, and I'm sorry to do this, but I quit. They are making it pretty hot for me at the union, not officially, but you know how it is. If I was you, I wouldn't go to the union for another bodyguard. I'd try to find one privately. But be careful. Again, I'm sorry, but I have to live too. Bruce." "I don't know whether to laugh or cry," Lisha said. "The two of us getting all this equipment, spending hours on this setup so an explosive won't detonate." "It's not as if I at least had a whole lot else to do," Richard said. Since the wave of anti-Sleepless sentiment, all but two of his marine consulting clients, vulnerable to the marketplace and thus to public opinion, had canceled their accounts. GroupNet, still up on Lisha's terminal, shrilled an emergency override. Lisha got there first. It was Tony and Davino. "Lisha, I need your legal help, if you'll give it. They're trying to fight me on Sanctuary. Please fly down here." Sanctuary was raw, brown gashes in the late spring earth. It was situated in the Allegheny Mountains of southern New York State, old hills rounded by age and covered with pine and hickory. A superb road led from the closest town, Conowongo, to Sanctuary. Low, maintenance-free buildings, whose design was plain but graceful, stood in various stages of completion. Jennifer Sharifi, unsmiling, met Lisha and Richard. She hadn't changed much in 6 years, but her long black hair was uncombed, and her dark eyes enormous with strain. "Tony wants to talk to you, but first, he asked me to show you both around." "What's wrong?" Lisha asked quietly. Jennifer didn't try to evade the question. "Later. First, look at Sanctuary. Tony respects your opinion enormously, Lisha. He wants you to see everything." The dormitories each held 50, with communal rooms for cooking, dining, relaxing, and bathing, and a warren of separate offices and studios and labs for work. "We're calling them dorms anyway, despite the etymology," Jennifer said. And even in this remark, which from anybody else would have been playful, Lisha heard the peculiar combination of Jennifer's habitual deliberate calm with her present strain. She was impressed, despite herself, with the completeness of Tony's plans for lives that would be both communal and intensely private. There was a gym, a small hospital. "By the end of next year, we'll have 18 AMA-certified doctors, you know, and 4 of them are thinking of coming here. A daycare facility, a school, and an intensive crop farm. Most of the food will come in from the outside, of course. So will most people's jobs, although they'll do as much of them as possible from here over data nets. We're not cutting ourselves off from the world, only creating a safe place from which to trade with it." Lisha didn't answer. Apart from the power facilities, self-supported Y energy, she was most impressed with the human planning. Tony had interested Sleepless from virtually every field they would need both to care for themselves and to deal with the outside world. "Lawyers and accountants come first," Jennifer said. "That's our first line of defense in safeguarding ourselves. Tony recognizes that most modern battles for power are fought in the courtroom and boardroom." But not all. Last, Jennifer showed them the plans for physical defense. For the first time, her taut body seemed to relax slightly. Every effort had been made to stop attackers without hurting them. Electronic surveillance completely circled the 150 square miles Jennifer had purchased. Some counties were smaller than that, Lisha thought, dazed. When breached, a force field a half-mile within the E-gate activated, delivering electric shocks to anyone on foot. "But only on the outside of the field. We don't want any of our kids hurt," Jennifer said. Unmanned penetration by vehicles or robots was identified by a system that located all moving metal above a certain mass within Sanctuary. Any moving metal that did not carry a special signaling device designed by Donald Pospula, a Sleepless who had patented important electronic components, was suspect. "Of course, we're not set up for an air attack or an outright army assault," Jennifer said. "But we don't expect that. Only the haters in self-motivated hate." Lisha touched the hard copy of the security plans with one finger. They troubled her. "If we can't integrate ourselves into the world, free trade should imply free movement," Jennifer said swiftly. "Only if free movement implies free minds." And at her tone, Lisha looked up. "I have something to tell you, Lisha." "What?" "Tony isn't here." "Where is he?" "In Cattaraugus County Jail in Conowongo. It's true we're having zoning battles about Sanctuary." "Zoning? In this isolated spot? But this is something else. Something that just happened this morning. Tony's been arrested for the kidnapping of Temi DiMarzo." The room wavered. "FBI?" "Yes." How did they find out?" "Some agent eventually cracked the case. They didn't tell us how. Tony needs a lawyer, Lisha. Bill Thane has already agreed, but Tony wants you." "Jennifer, I don't even take the bar exams until July." "He says he'll wait. Bill will act as his lawyer in the meantime. Will you pass the bar?" "Of course. But I already have a job lined up with Morehouse, Kennedy, and Anderson in New York." She stopped. Richard was looking at her hard. Jennifer inscrutably. Lisha said quietly, "What will he plead?" "Guilty," Jennifer said, "with, what is it called legally? Extenuating circumstances?" Lisha nodded. She had been afraid Tony would want to plead not guilty. More lies, subterfuge, ugly politics. Her mind ran swiftly over extenuating circumstances, precedents, tests to precedents. They could use Clements versus Voy. "Bill is at the jail now," Jennifer said. "Will you drive in with me?" She made the question a challenge. "Yes," Lisha said. In Conowongo, the county seat, they were not allowed to see Tony. William Thane, as his attorney, could go in and out freely. Lisha, not officially an attorney at all, could go nowhere. This was told to them by a man in the DA's office whose face stayed immobile while he spoke to them, and who spat on the ground behind their shoes when they turned to leave, even though this left him with a smear of spittle on his courthouse floor. Richard and Lisha drove their rental car to the airport for the flight back to Boston. On the way, Richard told Lisha he was leaving. He was moving to Sanctuary now, even before it was functional, to help with the planning and building. She stayed most of the time in her townhouse, studying ferociously for the bar exams or checking on the Sleepless children through GroupNet. She had not hired another bodyguard to replace Bruce, which made her reluctant to go outside very much. The reluctance, in turn, made her angry with herself. Once or twice a day, she scanned Kevin's electronic news clippings. There were signs of hope. The New York Times ran an editorial, widely reprinted on the electronic news services. Prosperity and hatred, a logic curve we'd rather not see. The United States has never been a country that much values calm, logic, and rationality. We have, as a people, tended to label these things cold. We have, as a people, tended to admire feeling and action. We exult in our stories and our memorials, not the creation of the Constitution, but its defense at Iwo Jima, not the intellectual achievements of a Linus Pauling, but the heroic passion of a Charles Lindbergh, not the inventors of the monorails and computers that unite us, but the composers of the angry songs of rebellion that divide us. A peculiar aspect of this phenomenon is that it grows stronger in times of prosperity. The better off our citizenry, the greater their contempt for the calm reasoning that got them there, and the more passionate their indulgence in emotion. Consider in the past century the gaudy excesses of the Roaring Twenties and the anti-establishment contempt of the 60s. Consider, in our own century, the unprecedented prosperity brought about by Y energy, and then consider that Kenzo Yagai, except to his followers, was seen as a greedy and bloodless logician, while our national adulation goes to neo-nihilist writer Stephen Castelli, to feely actress Brenda Foss, and to daredevil gravity well driver Jim Morse Luther. But most of all, as you ponder this phenomenon in your Y-energy houses, consider the current outpouring of irrational feeling directed at the Sleepless, since the publication of the joint findings of the Biotech Institute and the Chicago Medical School concerning sleepless tissue regeneration. Most of the Sleepless are intelligent. Most of them are calm, if you define that much-maligned word to mean directing one's energies into solving problems rather than to emoting about them. Even Pulitzer Prize winner Carolyn Rizzolo gave us a stunning play of ideas, not of passions run amok. All of them show a natural bent toward achievement, a bent given a decided boost by the one-third more time in their days to achieve. Their achievements lie, for the most part, in logical fields rather than emotional ones. Computers, law, finance, physics, medical research. They are rational, orderly, calm, intelligent, cheerful, young, and possibly very long-lived. And, in our United States of unprecedented prosperity, they are increasingly hated. Does the hatred that we have seen flower so fully over the past few months really grow, as many claim, from the unfair advantage the Sleepless have over the rest of us in securing jobs, promotions, money, and success? Is it really envy over the Sleepless's good fortune? Or does it come from something more pernicious, rooted in our tradition of shoot-from-the-hip American action, hatred of the logical, the calm, the considered, hatred, in fact, of the superior mind? If so, perhaps we should think deeply about the founders of this country. Jefferson, Washington, Paine, Adams, inhabitants of the age of reason, all. These men created our orderly and balanced system of laws precisely to protect the property and achievements created by the individual efforts of balanced and rational minds. The Sleepless may be our severest internal test yet of our own sober belief in law and order. No, the Sleepless were not created equal, but our attitudes toward them should be examined with a care equal to our soberest jurisprudence. We may not like what we learn about our own motives, but our credibility as a people may depend on the rationality and intelligence of the examination. Both have been in short supply in the public reaction to last month's research findings. Law is not theater. Before we write laws reflecting gaudy and dramatic feelings, we must be very sure we understand the difference. Lisha hugged herself, gazing in delight at the screen, smiling. She called the New York Times and asked who had written the editorial. The receptionist, cordial when she answered the phone, grew brusque. The Times was not releasing that information prior to internal investigation. It could not dampen her mood. She whirled around the apartment after days of sitting at her desk or screen. Delight demanded physical action. She washed dishes, picked up books. There were gaps in the furniture patterns, where Richard had taken pieces that belonged to him. A little quieter now. She moved the furniture to close the gaps. Susan Melling called to tell her about the Times editorial. They talked warmly for a few minutes. When Susan hung up, the phone rang again. "Lisha? Your voice still sounds the same. This is Stuart Sutter." Stuart? She had not seen him for 4 years. Their romance had lasted 2 years and then dissolved, not from any painful issue so much as from the press of both their studies. Standing by the comm terminal, hearing his voice, Lisha suddenly felt again his hands on her breasts in the cramped dormitory bed. All those years before she had found a good use for a bed. The phantom hands became Richard's hands, and a sudden pain pierced her. "Listen," Stuart said. "I'm calling because there's some information I think you should know. You take your bar exams next week, right? And then you have a tentative job with Morehouse, Kennedy, and Anderson?" "How do you know all that, Stuart?" "Men's room gossip." "Well, not as bad as that. But the New York legal community, that part of it anyway, is smaller than you think. And you're a pretty visible figure." "Yes," Lisha said neutrally. "Nobody has the slightest doubt you'll be called to the bar. But there is some doubt about the job with Morehouse Kennedy. You've got 2 senior partners, Alan Morehouse and Seth Brown, who have changed their minds since this flap. Adverse publicity for the firm, turning law into a circus, blah, 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 you know the drill. But you've also got 2 powerful champions, Anne Carlisle and Michael Kennedy, the old man himself. He's quite a mind. Anyway, I wanted you to know all this so you can recognize exactly what the situation is and know whom to count on in the infighting." "Thank you," Lisha said. "Stu, why do you care if I get it or not? Why should it matter to you?" There was a silence on the other end of the phone. Then Stuart said, very low, "We're not all noodleheads out here, Lisha. Justice does still matter to some of us. So does achievement." Light rose in her, a bubble of buoyant light. Stuart said, "You have a lot of support here for that stupid zoning fight over Sanctuary, too. You might not realize that, but you do. What the Parks Commission crowd is trying to pull is... But they're just being used as fronts. You know that. Anyway, when it gets as far as the courts, you'll have all the help you need." "Sanctuary isn't my doing, at all." "No? Well, I meant the plural you." "Thank you. I mean that. How are you doing?" "Fine. I'm a daddy now." "Really? Boy or girl?" "Girl. A beautiful little bitch named Justine. Drives me crazy. I'd like you to meet my wife sometime, Lisha." "I'd like that," Lisha said. She spent the rest of the night studying for her bar exams. The bubble stayed with her. She recognized exactly what it was. Joy. It was going to be all right. The contract, unwritten, between her and her society, Kenzo Yagai's society, Roger Camden's society, would hold. With dissent and strife, and yes, some hatred. She suddenly thought of Tony's Beggars in Spain, furious at the strong because the beggars were not. Yes, but it would hold. She believed that. She did. 7. Lisha took her bar exams in July. They did not seem hard to her. Afterward, 3 classmates, 2 men and a woman, made a fakely casual point of talking to Lisha until she had climbed safely into a taxi, whose driver obviously did not recognize her or stop signs. The 3 were all sleepers. A pair of undergraduates, clean-shaven blonde men with the long faces and pointless arrogance of rich stupidity, eyed Lisha and sneered. Lisha's female classmate sneered back. Lisha had a flight to Chicago the next morning. Alice was going to join her there. They had to clean out the big house on the lake, dispose of Roger's personal property, put the house on the market. Lisha had had no time to do it earlier. She remembered her father in the conservatory, wearing an ancient flat-topped hat he had picked up somewhere, potting orchids and jasmine and passion flowers. When the doorbell rang, she was startled. She almost never had visitors. Eagerly, she turned on the outside camera. Maybe it was Jonathan or Martha, back in Boston to surprise her, to celebrate. Why hadn't she thought before about some sort of celebration? Richard stood gazing up at the camera. He had been crying. She tore open the door. Richard made no move to come in. Lisha saw that what the camera had registered as grief was actually something else. Tears of rage. "Tony's dead." Lisha put out her hand blindly. Richard didn't take it. "They killed him in prison. Not the authorities, the other prisoners. In the recreation yard. Murderers, rapists, looters, scum of the earth, and they thought they had the right to kill him because he was different." Now Richard did grab her arm so hard that some bone, shifted beneath the flesh and pressed on a nerve. Not just different, better. Because he was better. Because we all are. We goddamn just don't stand up and shout it out of some misplaced feeling for their feelings. God! Lisha pulled her arm free and rubbed it, numb, staring at Richard's contorted face. They beat him to death with a lead pipe. No one even knows how they got a lead pipe. They beat him on the back of the head and then they rolled him over and... Don't, Lisha said. It came out a whimper. Richard looked at her. Despite his shouting, his violent grip on her arm, Lisha had the confused impression that this was the first time he had actually seen her. She went on rubbing her arm, staring at him in terror. He said quietly, I've come to take you to Sanctuary, Lisha. Dan Jenkins and Vernon Bulris are in the car outside. The three of us will carry you out if necessary, but you're coming. You see that, don't you? You're not safe here with your high profile and your spectacular looks. You're a natural target if anyone is. Do we have to force you? Or do you finally see for yourself that we have no choice? The bastards have left us no choice. Except Sanctuary. Lisha closed her eyes. Tony at 14 at the beach. Tony, his eyes ferocious and shining. The first to reach out his hand for the glass of interleukin-1. Beggars in Spain. I'll come. She had never known such anger. It scared her, coming in bouts throughout the long night, receding but always returning again. Richard held her in his arms, sitting with their backs against the wall of her library, and his holding made no difference at all. In the living room, Dan and Vernon talked in low voices. Sometimes the anger erupted in shouting, and Lisha heard herself and thought, I don't know you. Sometimes it became crying, sometimes talking about Tony, about all of them. Neither the shouting, nor the crying, nor the talking eased her at all. Planning did, a little. In a cold, dry voice she didn't recognize, Lisha told Richard about the trip to close the house in Chicago. She had to go. Alice was already there. If Richard and Dan and Vernon put Lisha on the plane, and Alice met her at the other end with Union bodyguards, she should be safe enough. Then she would change her return ticket from Boston to Conowongo and drive with Richard to Sanctuary. People are already arriving, Richard said. Jennifer Sharifi is organizing it, greasing the sleeper suppliers with so much money they can't resist. What about this townhouse here, Lisha? Your furniture and terminal and clothes? Lisha looked around her familiar office. Law books, red and green and brown, lined the walls, although most of the same information was online. A coffee cup rested on a printout on the desk. Beside it was the receipt she had requested from the taxi driver this afternoon, a giddy souvenir of the day she had passed her bar exams. She had thought of having it framed. Above the desk was a holographic portrait of Kenzo Yagai. Let it rot, Lisha said. Richard's arm tightened around her. I've never seen you like this, Alice said, subdued. It's more than just clearing out the house, isn't it? Let's get on with it, Lisha said. She yanked a suit from her father's closet. Do you want any of this stuff for your husband? It wouldn't fit. The hats? No, Alice said. Lisha, what is it? Let's just do it. She yanked all the clothes from Camden's closet, piled them on the floor, scrawled "For Volunteer Agency" on a piece of paper, and dropped it on top of the pile. Silently, Alice started adding clothes from the dresser, which already bore a taped paper scrawled "Estate Auction." The curtains were already down throughout the house. Alice had done that yesterday. She had also rolled up the rugs. Sunset glared red on the bare wooden floors. What about your old room, Lisha said. What do you want there? I've already tagged it, Alice said. A mover will come Thursday. Fine. What else? The conservatory. Sanderson has been watering everything, but he didn't really know what needed how much, so some of the plants are... Fire Sanderson, Lisha said curtly. The exotics can die, or have them sent to a hospital if you'd rather. Just watch out for the ones that are poisonous. Come on, let's do the library. Alice sat slowly on a rolled-up rug in the middle of Camden's bedroom. She had cut her hair. Lisha thought it looked ugly, like jagged brown spikes around her broad face. She had also gained more weight. She was starting to look like their mother. Alice said, Do you remember the night I told you I was pregnant? Just before you left for Harvard? Let's do the library. Do you? Alice said. For God's sake, can't you just once listen to someone else, Lisha? Do you have to be so much like Daddy every single minute? I'm not Daddy. The hell you're not. You're exactly what he made you. But that's not the point. Do you remember that night? Lisha walked over the rug and out the door. Alice simply sat. After a minute, Lisha walked back in. I remember. You were near tears, Alice said implacably. Her voice was quiet. I don't even remember exactly why. Maybe because I wasn't going to college after all. But I put my arms around you, and for the first time in years, Lisha, I felt you really were my sister. Despite all of it, the roaming the halls all night and the show-off arguments with Daddy in the special school, and the artificially long legs and golden hair, all that crap. You seemed to need me to hold you. You seemed to need me. You seemed to need... What are you saying? Lisha demanded. That you can only be close to someone if they're in trouble and need you? That you can only be a sister if I was in some kind of pain, open sores running? Is that the bond between you sleepers? Protect me while I'm unconscious. I'm just as crippled as you are. No, Alice said. I'm saying that you could be a sister, only if you were in some kind of pain. Lisha stared at her. You're stupid, Alice. Alice said calmly. I know that. Compared to you, I am. I know that. Lisha jerked her head angrily. She felt ashamed of what she had just said, and yet it was true. And they both knew it was true. And anger still lay in her like a dark void, formless and hot. It was the formless part that was the worst. Without shape, there could be no action. Without action, the anger went on burning her, choking her. Alice said, When I was 12, Susan gave me a dress for our birthday. You were away somewhere on one of those overnight field trips your fancy progressive school did all the time. The dress was silk, pale blue, with antique lace, very beautiful. I was thrilled, not only because it was beautiful, but because Susan had gotten it for me, and gotten software for you. The dress was mine. Was, I thought, me. In the gathering gloom, Lisha could barely make out her broad, plain features. The first time I wore it, a boy said, Stole your sister's dress, Alice? Snitched it while she was sleeping? Then he laughed like crazy, the way they always did. I threw the dress away. I didn't even explain to Susan, although I think she would have understood. Whatever was yours, and whatever wasn't yours was yours too. That's the way Daddy set it up. The way he hardwired it into our genes. You too? Lisha said. You're no different from the other envious beggars? Alice stood up from the rug. She did it slowly, leisurely, brushing dust off the back of her wrinkled skirt, smoothing the print fabric. Then she walked over and hit Lisha in the mouth. Now do you see me as real? Alice asked quietly. Lisha put her hand to her mouth. She felt blood. The phone rang, Camden's unlisted personal line. Alice walked over, picked it up, listened, and held it calmly out to Lisha. It's for you. Numb, Lisha took it. Lisha, this is Kevin. Listen, something's happened. Stella Bevington called me on the phone, not GroupNet. I think her parents took away her modem. I picked up the phone and she screamed, This is Stella, they're hitting me, he's drunk. And then the line went dead. Randy's gone to Sanctuary. Hell, they've all gone. You're closest to her. She's still in Skokie. You better get there fast. Have you got bodyguards you trust? Yes, Lisha said, although she hadn't. The anger finally took form. I can handle it. I don't know how you'll get her out of there, Kevin said. They'll recognize you. They know she called somebody. They might even have knocked her out. I'll handle it, Lisha said. Handle what? Alice said. Lisha faced her. Even though she knew she shouldn't, she said, What your people do to one of ours, a 7-year-old kid who's getting beaten by her parents because she's sleepless, because she's better than you are. She ran down the stairs and out to the rental car she had driven from the airport. Alice ran right down with her. Not your car, Lisha. They can trace a rental car. Just like that. My car. Lisha screamed. If you think you're... Alice yanked open the door of her battered Toyota, a model so old the Y energy cones weren't even concealed, but hung like drooping jowls on either side. She shoved Lisha into the passenger seat, slammed the door, and rammed herself behind the wheel. Her hands were steady. Where? Blackness swooped over Lisha. She put her head down as far between her knees as the cramped Toyota would allow. It had been 3 days since she had eaten. Not since the night before the bar exams. The faintness receded, swept over her again as soon as she raised her head. She told Alice the address in Skokie. Stay way in the back, Alice said. And there's a scarf in the glove compartment. Put it on, low, to hide as much of your face as possible. Alice had stopped the car along Highway 42. Lisha said, This isn't... It's a quick guard place. We have to look like we have some protection, Lisha. We don't need to tell him anything. I'll hurry. She was out in 3 minutes with a huge man in a cheap dark suit. He squeezed into the front seat beside Alice and said nothing at all. Alice did not introduce him. The house was small, a little shabby, with lights on downstairs, none upstairs. The first stars shone in the north, away from Chicago. Alice said to the guard, "Get out of the car and stand here by the car door. No, more in the light. And don't do anything unless I'm attacked in some way." The man nodded. Alice started up the walk. Lisha scrambled out of the back seat and caught her sister 2/3 of the way to the plastic front door. "Alice, what the hell are you doing? I have to—" "Keep your voice down," Alice said, glancing at the guard. "Lisha, think. You'll be recognized. Here, near Chicago, with a sleepless daughter. These people have looked at your picture in magazines for years. They've watched long-range holovids of you. They know you. They know you're going to be a lawyer. Me, they've never seen. I'm nobody." "Alice, for Christ's sake, get back in the car," Alice hissed, and pounded on the front door. Lisha drew off the walk into the shadow of a willow tree. A man opened the door. His face was completely blank. Alice said, "Child Protection Agency, we got a call from a little girl, this number, let me in." "There's no little girl here." "This is an emergency priority 1, Alice said. Child Protection Act 186, let me in." The man, still blank-faced, glanced at the huge figure by the car. "You got a search warrant?" "I don't need one in a priority 1 child emergency. If you don't let me in, you're going to have legal snarls like you never bargained for." Lisha clamped her lips together. No one would believe that. It was legal gobbledygook. Her lip throbbed where Alice had hit it. The man stood aside to let Alice enter. The guard started forward. Lisha hesitated, then let him. He entered with Alice. Lisha waited, alone in the dark. In 3 minutes they were out, the guard carrying a child. Alice's broad face gleamed pale in the porch light. Lisha sprang forward, opened the car door, and helped the guard ease the child inside. The guard was frowning, a slow, puzzled frown shot with wariness. Alice said, "Here. This is an extra $100 to get back to the city by yourself." "Hey," the guard said, but he took the money. He stood looking after them as Alice pulled away. "He'll go straight to the police," Lisha said despairingly. "He has to, or risk his union membership." "I know," Alice said, "but by that time, we'll be out of the car." "Where?" "At the hospital," Alice said. "Alice, we can't—" Lisha didn't finish. She turned to the back seat. "Stella, are you conscious?" "Yes," said the small voice. Lisha groped until her fingers found the rear seat illuminator. Stella lay stretched out on the seat, her face distorted with pain. She cradled her left arm in her right. A single bruise colored her face above the left eye. Her red hair was tangled and dirty. "You're Lisha Camden," the child said, and started to cry. "Her arm's broken," Alice said. "Honey, can you—" Lisha's throat felt thick. She had trouble getting the words out. "Can you hold on till we get you to a doctor?" "Yes," Stella said. "Just don't take me back there." "We won't," Lisha said, "ever." She glanced at Alice and saw Tony's face. Alice said, "There's a community hospital about 10 miles south of here." "How do you know that?" "I was there once, drug overdose," Alice said briefly. She drove hunched over the wheel, with the face of someone thinking furiously. Lisha thought, too, trying to see a way around the legal charge of kidnapping. They probably couldn't say the child came willingly. Stella would undoubtedly cooperate, but at her age, and in her condition, she was probably non sui juris. Her word would have no legal weight. "Alice, we can't even get her into the hospital without insurance information. Verifiable online." "Listen," Alice said, not to Lisha, but over her shoulder toward the back seat. "Here's what we're going to do, Stella. I'm going to tell them you're my daughter, and you fell off a big rock you were climbing while we stopped for a snack at a roadside picnic area. We're driving from California to Philadelphia to see your grandmother. Your name is Jordan Watrous, and you're 5 years old. Got that, honey?" "I'm 7, Stella said. Almost 8. "You're a very large 5. Your birthday is March 23rd. Can you do this, Stella?" "Yes," the little girl said. Her voice was stronger. Lisha stared at Alice. "Can you do this?" "Of course I can," Alice said. "I'm Roger Camden's daughter." Alice half-carried, half-supported Stella into the emergency room of the small community hospital. Lisha watched from the car, the short, stocky woman, the child's thin body with the twisted arm. Then she drove Alice's car to the farthest corner of the parking lot, under the dubious cover of a skimpy maple, and locked it. She tied the scarf more securely around her face. Alice's license plate number and her name would be in every police and rental car databank by now. The medical banks were slower. Often they uploaded from local precincts only once a day, resenting the governmental interference in what was still, despite a half-century of battle, a private sector enterprise. Alice and Stella would probably be all right in the hospital. Probably. But Alice could not rent another car. Lisha could. But the data file that would flash to rental agencies on Alice Camden Watrous might or might not include that she was Lisha Camden's twin. Lisha looked at the rows of cars in the lot. A flashy luxury Chrysler, an Ikeda van, a row of middle-class Toyotas and Mercedes, a vintage '99 Cadillac. She could imagine the owner's face if that were missing. 10 or 12 cheap runabouts, a hover car with the uniformed driver asleep at the wheel, and a battered farm truck. Lisha walked over to the truck. A man sat at the wheel, smoking. She thought of her father. "Hello," Lisha said. The man rolled down his window but didn't answer. He had greasy brown hair. "See that hover car over there?" Lisha said. She made her voice sound young, high. The man glanced at it indifferently. From this angle you couldn't see that the driver was asleep. "That's my bodyguard. He thinks I'm inside, the way my father told me to, getting this lip looked at." She could feel her mouth swollen from Alice's blow. "So?" Lisha stamped her foot. "So I don't want to be inside. He's a shit and so's Daddy. I want out. I'll give you 4,000 bank credits for your truck, cash." The man's eyes widened. He tossed away his cigarette and looked again at the hover car. The driver's shoulders were broad, and the car was within easy screaming distance. "All nice and legal," Lisha said, trying to smirk. Her knees felt watery. "Let me see the cash." Lisha backed away from the truck to where he could not reach her. She took the money from her arm clip. She was used to carrying a lot of cash. There had always been Bruce, or someone like Bruce. There had always been safety. "Get out of the truck on the other side," Lisha said, "and lock the door behind you. Leave the keys on the seat where I can see them from here. Then I'll put the money on the roof where you can see it." The man laughed, a sound like gravel pouring. "Regular little Dabney-ang, aren't you? Is that what they teach you society Debs at your fancy schools?" Lisha had no idea who Dabney-ang was. She waited, watching the man try to think of a way to cheat her, and tried to hide her contempt. She thought of Tony. "All right," he said, and slid out of the truck. "Lock the door." He grinned, opened the door again, and locked it. Lisha put the money on the roof, yanked open the driver's door, clambered in, locked the door, and powered up the window. The man laughed. She put the key into the ignition, started the truck, and drove toward the street. Her hands trembled. She drove slowly around the block twice. When she came back, the man was gone, and the driver of the hover car was still asleep. She had wondered if the man would wake him, out of sheer malice, but he had not. She parked the truck and waited. An hour and a half later, Alice and a nurse wheeled Stella out of the emergency entrance. Lisha leaped out of the truck and yelled, "Coming, Alice!" waving both her arms. It was too dark to see Alice's expression. Lisha could only hope that Alice showed no dismay at a battered truck, that she had not told the nurse to expect a red car. Alice said, "This is Julie Bergadon, a friend that I called while you were setting Jordan's arm." The nurse nodded, uninterested. The two women helped Stella into the high truck cab. There was no back seat. Stella had a cast on her arm and looked drugged. "How?" Alice said as they drove off. Lisha didn't answer. She was watching a police hover car land at the other end of the parking lot. Two officers got out and strode purposefully toward Alice's locked car under the skimpy maple. "My God," Alice said. For the first time she sounded frightened. "They won't trace us," Lisha said. "Not to this truck. Count on it." "Lisha?" Alice's voice spiked with fear. "Stella's asleep." Lisha glanced at the child, slumped against Alice's shoulder. "No, she's not. She's unconscious from painkillers." "Is that all right? Normal? For her? We can black out. We can even experience substance-induced sleep. Tony and she and Richard and Janine in the midnight woods." "Didn't you know that, Alice?" "No. We don't know very much about each other, do we?" They drove south in silence. Finally, Alice said, "Where are we going to take her, Lisha?" "I don't know. Any one of the Sleepless would be the first place the police would check." "You can't risk it, not the way things are," Alice said. She sounded weary. "But all my friends are in California. I don't think we could drive this rust bucket that far before getting stopped." "It wouldn't make it anyway." "What should we do?" "Let me think." At an expressway exit was a payphone. It wouldn't be data shielded, as GroupNet was. Would Kevin's open line be tapped? Probably. There was no doubt the Sanctuary line would be. Sanctuary. All of them were going there or already there, Kevin had said. Holed up. trying to pull the worn Allegheny Mountains around them like a safe little den. Except for the children like Stella, who could not. Where? With whom? Elisha closed her eyes. The Sleepless were out. The police would find Stella within hours. Susan Melling? But she had been Alice's all-too-visible stepmother, and was a co-beneficiary of Camden's will. They would question her almost immediately. It couldn't be anyone traceable to Alice. It could only be a sleeper that Elisha knew and trusted. And why should anyone at all fit that description? Why should she risk so much on anyone who did? She stood a long time in the dark phone kiosk. Then she walked to the truck. Alice was asleep, her head thrown back against the seat. A tiny line of drool ran down her chin. Her face was white and drained in the bad light from the kiosk. Elisha walked back to the phone. Stewart? Stewart Sutter? Yes? This is Elisha Camden. Something has happened. She told the story tersely, in bald sentences. Stewart did not interrupt. Elisha, Stewart said, and stopped. I need help, Stewart. I'll help you, Alice. I don't need your help. A wind whistled over the dark field beside the kiosk, and Elisha shivered. She heard in the wind the thin keen of a beggar. In the wind, in her own voice. All right, Stewart said. This is what we'll do. I have a cousin in Ripley, New York, just over the state line from Pennsylvania. The route you'll be driving east. It has to be in New York. I'm licensed in New York. Take the little girl there. I'll call my cousin and tell her you're coming. She's an elderly woman, was quite an activist in her youth. Her name is Janet Patterson. The town is... What makes you so sure she'll get involved? She could go to jail, and so could you. She's been in jail so many times you wouldn't believe it. Political protests going all the way back to Vietnam. But no one's going to jail. I'm now your attorney of record. I'm privileged. I'm going to get Stella declared a ward of the state. That shouldn't be too hard with the hospital records you established in Skokie. Then, she can be transferred to a foster home in New York. I know just the place, people who are fair and kind. Then Alice, Stella's resident in Illinois. You can't... Yes, I can. Since those research findings about the sleepless lifespan have come out, legislators have been railroaded by stupid constituents, scared or jealous or just plain angry. The result is a body of so-called law, riddled with contradictions, absurdities, and loopholes. None of it will stand in the long run, or at least I hope not. But in the meantime, it can all be exploited. I can use it to create the most goddamn convoluted case for Stella that anybody ever saw, and in the meantime, she won't be returned home. But that won't work for Alice. She'll need an attorney licensed in Illinois. We have one, Elisha said. Candace Holt. No, not a Sleepless. Trust me on this, Elisha. I'll find somebody good. There's a guy in... Are you crying? No, Elisha said. Crying. Ah, God, Stewart said. Bastards. I'm sorry all this happened, Elisha. Don't be, Elisha said. When she had directions to Stewart's cousin, she walked back to the truck. Alice was still asleep. Stella still unconscious. Elisha closed the truck door as quietly as possible. The engine balked and roared, but Alice didn't wake. There was a crowd of people with them in the narrow and darkened cab. Stewart Sutter, Tony Indovino, Susan Melling, Kenzo Yagai, Roger Camden. To Stewart Sutter, she said, You called to inform me about the situation at Morehouse Kennedy. You are risking your career and your cousin for Stella. And you stand to gain nothing. Like Susan telling me in advance about Bernie Kuhn's brain, Susan who lost her life to Daddy's dream and regained it by her own strength. A contract without consideration for each side is not a contract. Every first-year student knows that. To Kenzo Yagai, she said, Trade isn't always linear. You've missed that. If Stewart gives me something and I give Stella something, and 10 years from now, Stella is a different person because of that, and gives something to someone else, as yet unknown, it's an ecology. An ecology of trade. Yes, each niche needed, even if they're not contractually bound. Does a horse need a fish? Yes. To Tony, she said, Yes, there are beggars in Spain who trade nothing, give nothing, do nothing. But there are more than beggars in Spain. Withdraw from the beggars, you withdraw from the whole damn country. And you withdraw from the possibility of the ecology of help. That's what Alice wanted. All those years ago in her bedroom. Pregnant, scared, angry, jealous. She wanted to help me. And I wouldn't let her because I didn't need it. But I do now. And she did then. Beggars need to help as well as be helped. And finally, there was only Daddy left. She could see him, bright-eyed, holding thick-leaved exotic flowers in his strong hands. To Camden, she said, "You were wrong. Alice is special." "Oh, Daddy, the specialness of Alice." "You were wrong." As soon as she thought this, lightness filled her. Not the buoyant bubble of joy, not the hard clarity of examination, but something else. Sunshine. Soft through the conservatory glass, where two children ran in and out. She suddenly felt light herself. Not buoyant, but translucent, a medium for the sunshine to pass clear through, on its way to somewhere else. She drove the sleeping woman and the wounded child through the night east, toward the state line. Book 2, Sanctuary, 2051. A nation may be said to consist of its territories, its people, and its laws. The territory is the only part which is of certain durability. Abraham Lincoln, Message to Congress, December 1st, 1862. 8. Jordan Watrous stood just outside the front gate of the We Sleep scooter factory, facing the dusty Mississippi Road. Electrified fence 8 feet high stretched away on either side. Not a Y-energy field, not sophisticated technology, but it would do. For now, anyway, while attacks on the factory were minor, unorganized, and verbal. Later on, they would need a Y field. Hawk said so. Across the river in Arkansas, the Y-energy cones of the Samsung Chrysler plant glinted in the early morning sun. Jordan squinted down the road. Sweat matted his hair and trickled down his neck. The guard, a stringy, tow-headed woman in faded jeans, stuck her head out of her kiosk and called, "Hot enough for you, Jordan?" Over his shoulder, he said, "Always is, Maylene." She laughed. "You California boys just wilt up in God's natural heat. I guess we're not as tough as you river rats. Boy, ain't nobody as tough as us. You just look at Mr. Hawk." As if it were possible for anyone at a We Sleep factory to do otherwise. Not that Hawk hadn't earned the reverence in Maylene's voice. When Maylene had been hired last winter, Jordan, only 4 weeks into his own job as Hawk's personal assistant, had gone with Hawk to her shack for the interview. Although adequately heated and provisioned for the cheap Y-energy that was every citizen's right under the dole, the shack had no indoor plumbing, little furniture, and few toys for the skinny, tow-headed kids that had stared at Jordan's leather jacket and lapel comlink. Last week, Maylene had announced with pride that she'd just bought a toilet and a lace pillow set. The pride, Jordan now knew, was as practical as the toilet. He knew because Calvin Hawk had taught him. Jordan returned to studying the road. Maylene said, "Expecting someone?" Slowly, Jordan turned around. "Didn't Hawk call it in?" "Call what in? He didn't tell me nothing." "Jesus Christ," Jordan said. The terminal in the kiosk shrilled, and Maylene pulled her head back in. Jordan watched her through the plastiglass. As she listened, her face hardened, as only these Mississippi faces could. Instantaneous ice in the steaming heat. He had never seen that in California. Obviously, Hawk was telling her not only to admit a visitor, but who the visitor was. "Yes, sir," she mouthed at the terminal. And Jordan winced. Nobody at the plant called Hawk sir unless they were furious. And nobody got furious at Hawk. They displaced it, always. Maylene stepped away from her kiosk. "This you're doing, Jordan?" "Yes." "Why?" She spat the word. And Jordan finally, Hawk said it always took him too long to get angry, felt his own face harden. "Is that your business, Maylene?" "Anything goes on in this here plant's my business," Maylene said, which was only the truth. Hawk had made it the truth for all 800 employees. "We don't want her kind here." Hawk apparently does. "I asked you why." "Why don't you ask him why?" "I'm asking you. Why, damn it?" Along the road, a dust cloud advanced, a ground car. Jordan felt a sudden stab of dread. Had anyone told her not to come in a Samsung Chrysler? But she could be trusted to already know something like that. She always did. Maylene snarled. "I done asked you a question, Jordan. What's Mr. Hawk doing letting one of them in our plant?" "You made a demand, not asked a question." The anger felt good now, sweeping away his nervousness. "But I'll answer it anyway, Maylene. Just for you. Lisha Camden is here because she asked to come, and Hawk gave her permission." "I can see that. What I can't see is why." The car pulled up at the gate. It was heavily armored and packed with bodyguards. The driver got out to open the doors. The car was not a Samsung Chrysler. "Why?" Maylene repeated with such hatred that even Jordan was startled. He turned. Her thin mouth twisted in a snarl, but in her eyes was a fear that Jordan recognized. Hawk had taught him to recognize it. A fear not of bone and blood people, but of the degrading choices those people had indirectly caused. $2 for a half-pack of cigarettes. Or $2 for a pair of warm socks. Extra milk for the kids above the dole allotment, or a haircut. The fear was not of starving, not in a country of prosperity built on cheap energy, but of being shut out from that prosperity. Second class. Not good enough for that basic badge of adult dignity, work. A parasite. The anger oozed out of Jordan. Sadly, he felt it go. Anger was so much easier. As gently as he could, he said to Maylene, "Lisha Camden's here because she's my mother's sister, my aunt." He wondered how long it would take Hawk this time to redeem him. "And each scooter takes 16 assembly line operations?" Lisha asked. "Yes," Jordan said. They stood with Lisha's bodyguards, everybody in hard hats and goggles, watching Station 8E. 24 scooters were swarmed over by 3 workers, who in their zeal completely ignored the visitors. The zeal was more notable than the results, but of course Lisha would already know that. 6 months ago, at his little sister's 18th birthday party in California, Lisha had questioned Jordan about the factory so closely that he had known, like cold water around his bones, that eventually she would ask to visit. What he hadn't expected was that Hawk would let her. She said, "I thought Mr. Hawk might join us. I came to meet him after all." "He said to bring you to the office after the tour." Beneath the heavy safety glasses, Lisha's mouth smiled. "Showing me my place?" "I guess so," Jordan said heavily. He hated it when Hawk, always unpredictable, descended to playing one-upmanship. To Jordan's surprise, Lisha laid a hand on his arm. "Don't mind on my behalf, Jordan. It's not as if he's not entitled." And what could Jordan say to that? Entitlement, after all, was the entire issue. Who got what, and how, and why? Somehow Jordan didn't feel like the proper person to comment on that. He wasn't even certain who within his own family was entitled to what or why. His mother and his aunt had such a strange relationship. Or maybe strained was a better word. And yet it wasn't. Lisha visited the Watrous family in California only on ceremonial occasions. Alice never visited Lisha in Chicago at all. Yet Alice, who loved gardening, had a fresh bouquet from her garden flown to Lisha's apartment every single day, at a cost Jordan considered insane. And the flowers were ordinary. Hardy garden blooms, phlox, and sunflowers, and daylilies, and lemon-drop marigolds, which Lisha could have bought on the streets of Chicago for a few dollars. "Doesn't Aunt Lisha prefer those indoor exotics?" Jordan asked once. "Yes," his mother said, smiling. Lisha always brought Jordan and his sister, Moira, wonderful presents. Junior electronics kits, telescopes, 2 shares of a stock to follow on the data nets. Alice always seemed as pleased by the gifts as the kids were. Yet when Lisha showed Jordan and Moira how to use each one, how to adjust the telescope to azimuth and altitude, how to do Japanese calligraphy on rice paper, Alice always left the room. After the first few years, Jordan sometimes wished Lisha would leave too, and let him and Moira just read the instructions themselves. Lisha explained too fast and too hard and too long, and got upset that Jordan and Moira didn't remember everything the first time. It didn't even help that Aunt Lisha's upset seemed to be with herself, not with them. It made Jordan feel stupid. "Lisha has her own ways," was all that Alice would say, "and we have ours." Strangest of all was Alice's twin group. Lisha had looked first shocked, then sad, then angry, when she heard about the twin group. Alice volunteered there 3 days a week. The group kept data files about twins who could communicate with each other across vast distances, who knew what each other was thinking, who felt pain when the other was in trouble. They also studied pairs of twins in preschool to see how they learned to differentiate themselves as separate people. This jumble of ESP, parapsychology, and scientific method bewildered Jordan, then 17. "Aunt Lisha says the statistics of coincidence can account for most of your ESP. And I thought you and her weren't even monozygotic twins." "We're not," Alice said. In the last 2 years, Jordan had seen a lot of his aunt, without telling his mother. Lisha was a Sleepless, the economic enemy. She was also fair, generous, and idealistic. It troubled him. So many things troubled him. Touring the plant took over an hour. Jordan tried to see the place through Lisha's eyes. People, instead of cost-efficient robots, shouted arguments on the line, rock music blaring. Rejected parts from receiving inspection, half repacked in dirty cartons. Somebody's gnawed-on sandwich kicked into a corner. When Jordan finally led Lisha into Hawk's office, Hawk rose from behind his massive, rough-hewn desk of Georgia pine. Ms. Camden, an honor. Mr. Hawk. She held out her hand. Hawk took it, and Jordan watched her slight recoil. People meeting Calvin Hawk for the first time usually recoiled. Not until that second had Jordan realized how intently he'd wondered if Lisha would. It wasn't Hawk's huge size as much as his disconcerting physical sharpness. Beaked nose, cheekbones like chisels, piercing black eyes, even the necklace of sharpened wolf's teeth, which had belonged to his great-great-great-grandfather, a mountain man who married 3 Indian women and killed 300 braves. Or so Hawk said. Would wolf's teeth, nearly 200 years old, Jordan wondered, still be so sharp? Hawk's would. Lisha smiled up at Hawk, nearly a foot taller despite her own height, and said, "Thank you for letting me come." When Hawk said nothing, she added directly, "Why did you?" He pretended she'd asked a different question. "You're safe enough here, even without your goons. There is no baseless hatred in my plants." Jordan thought of Maylene, but said nothing. You didn't contradict Hawk in public. Lisha said coolly, "An interesting use of baseless, Mr. Hawk. In the law, we call a usage like that insinuating. But now that I am here, I'd like to ask some questions, if I may." "Of course," Hawk said. He folded his enormous arms across his chest and leaned back against his desk, apparently all agreeable helpfulness. On the desk sat a comlink, a coffee mug with a Harvard logo, and a Cherokee ceremonial doll. None of them had been there this morning. Hawk, Jordan saw, had been assembling his stage set. The back of Jordan's neck prickled. Lisha said, "Your scooters are stripped-down models with the simplest possible Y-cones and fewer options than any other model on the market." "That's right," Hawk said pleasantly. "And their reliability is less than any other model. They need more replacement parts sooner. In fact, nothing but the Y-cone deflector shield carries any kind of warranty. And of course, the deflectors are under patent and aren't subcontracted here." "You've done your homework," Hawk said. "The scooters can reach a maximum of only 30 miles per hour. True. They sell for 10% more than a comparable Schwinn, or Ford, or Sony. Also true. Yet you've captured 32% of the domestic market. You've opened 3 plants in the last year, and you've filed a corporate return on assets of 28% when the industry average is barely 11%. Hawk smiled. Lisha took a step toward him. She said intently, "Don't go on doing it, Mr. Hawk. It's a terrible mistake. Not for us, for you." Hawk said genially, "Are you threatening my plant, Ms. Camden?" Jordan's stomach tightened. Hawk was deliberately misinterpreting what Lisha had said, turning it from a plea into a threat, so he could have a fight instead of a discussion. So this was why he'd let her visit a We Sleep plant. He wanted the cheap thrill of a face-to-face confrontation, the dirt-poor leader of a national political movement going to the mat with the big-time Sleepless lawyer. Disappointment swept through Jordan. Hawk was bigger than that. He needed Hawk to be bigger than that. Lisha said, "Of course I'm not threatening you, Mr. Hawk, and you know it. I'm merely trying to point out that your We Sleep movement is dangerous to the country and to yourselves. Don't be so hypocritical as to pretend not to understand." Hawk went on smiling genially, but Jordan saw a tiny muscle in his neck, just above a yellowed wolf tooth, begin to beat rhythmically. "I could hardly help understand, Miss Camden. You've hammered on this one stone in the press for years now. And I'll go on hammering. Whatever drives sleepers and sleepless farther apart is ultimately no good for either of us. You have people buying your scooters not because they're good, not because they're cheap, not because they're beautiful, but solely because they're made by sleepers, with profits going only to sleepers. You, and all your followers in other industries, are splitting the country in two economically, Mr. Hawk. creating a dual economy based on hate. That's dangerous for everyone. But especially for the economic interests of Sleepless? Hawk asked. Apparently all disinterested interest. Jordan saw that he thought he'd gained ground by Lisha's sudden emotion. No, Lisha said wearily. Come on, Mr. Hawk, you know better. Sleepless economic interests are based in the global economy, especially in finance and high-tech skills. You could manufacture every vehicle, building, and widget in America and not touch them. Them, Jordan thought. Not us. He tried to see if Hawk had noticed. Hawk said silkily, Then why are you here, Ms. Camden? For the same reason I go to Sanctuary, to rail against stupidity. The tiny muscle in Hawk's neck beat faster. Jordan saw that he hadn't expected Lisha to bracket him with Sanctuary, the enemy. Hawk reached across his desk and pressed a buzzer. Lisha's bodyguards tensed. Hawk tossed them a look of contempt. Traitors to their own biological side. The office door opened, and a young black woman entered, looking puzzled. Hawk, Coltrane say you all want to see me. Yes, Tina, thank you. This lady is interested in our plant. Would you mind telling her a little about your job here? Tina turned obediently, and without recognition to Lisha. I work Station 9, she said. Before that, I don't have nothing. My family don't have nothing. We walk to Dole, pick up the food, walk home, eat it. We wait to die. She went on, telling a story familiar by now to Jordan, different only in Tina's melodramatic approach to telling it, which was undoubtedly why Hawk had had her waiting. Fed, sheltered, clothed cheaply by the dole, and completely unable to compete beyond that economic level. Until Calvin Hawk and the We Sleep movement provided a job that paid wages, because the market for it had been wrested out of the national market on wholly uneconomic terms. I buy only We Sleep products. I get to sell my We Sleep products, Tina chanted fervently. The only way we get any other pie, Hawk said. And if somebody in your community buys a different product because it's cheaper or better. That somebody ain't in my community very long, Tina said darkly. We take care of our own. Thank you, Tina, Hawk said. Tina seemed to know this was dismissal. She left, but not before throwing Hawk the same look they all did. Jordan hoped that Lisha recognized the look from legal clients she had kept from a different sort of prison. His stomach relaxed slightly. Lisha said wryly to Hawk, Quite a performance. More than just a performance. The dignity of individual effort. An old Yagaius tenet, isn't it? Or can't you allow yourself to recognize economic facts? I recognize all the limitations of a free market economy, Mr. Hawk. Supply and demand puts workers on the exact same footing as widgets, and people are not widgets. But you cannot create economic health by unionizing consumers the way you would unionize workers. That's just how I am creating economic health, Ms. Camden. Only temporarily, Lisha said. Abruptly, she leaned forward. Do you expect your consumers to stay away from better products forever on the basis of class hatred? Class hatred diminishes when prosperity lets people rise in class. My people will never rise in class to equal Sleepless, and you know it. Yours is the Darwinian edge, so we capitalize on what we do have. Sheer numbers. But it doesn't have to be a Darwinian struggle. Hawk stood. The muscle in his neck was still now. Jordan could see that Hawk felt he'd won. Doesn't it, Ms. Camden? Who made it so? The Sleepless control 28% of the economy now, despite the fact that you're a tiny minority. The percentage is growing. You yourself are a stockholder through the Aurora Holding Company in the Samsung Chrysler plant across the river. Jordan was jolted. He had not known that. For a second, suspicion flooded him, corrosive as acid. His aunt had asked to come here, asked to talk to Hawk. He looked again at Lisha. She was smiling. No, that wasn't her motive. What was wrong with him? Would he spend his whole life uncertain about everything? Lisha said, There is nothing illegal in owning stock, Mr. Hawk. I do it for the most obvious of reasons, to turn a profit. A profit on the best possible goods and services that can be produced in fair competition, offered to anyone who wishes to buy. Anyone. Very commendable, Hawk said bitingly. But of course, not everyone can buy. Just so. Then we agree on at least one thing. Some people are shut out of your wonderful Darwinian economy. Do you want them to take that meekly? Lisha said. I want to open the doors and bring them in. How, Ms. Camden? How do we compete on equal grounds with the Sleepless, or with mainstream companies funded in whole or in part by Sleepless financial genius? Not with hatred creating two economies. Then with what? Tell me. Before Lisha could answer, the door suddenly swung open and 3 men leaped into the room. Lisha's bodyguards immediately blocked her, guns drawn. But the men must have expected this. They brandished cameras, not guns, and began filming. Since all they could see was the phalanx of bodyguards, they filmed that. This bewildered the guards, who looked at one another sideways. Meanwhile, Jordan, backed into a corner, was the only one who saw the sudden, slight, telltale brightening of an optic panel high on the wall, in a room widely touted as being without surveillance of any kind. Out, the head bodyguard, or whatever he was called, said between his teeth. The film crew obligingly left, and no one but Jordan had seen Hawk's camera. Why? What did Hawk want with a clandestine still he could claim was taken by a legitimate film crew? And should Jordan tell his aunt that Hawk had it? Could it harm her? Hawk was watching Jordan. Hawk nodded once, with such warmth in his eyes, such tender understanding of Jordan's dilemma, that Jordan was immediately reassured. Hawk meant no personal harm to Lisha. He didn't operate that way. His goals were large ones, sweeping ones, right ones, but they took note of individuals, as no Sleepless except Lisha ever seemed to do. No matter what the history book said was necessary, Hawk did not break individual eggs to create his revolution. Jordan relaxed. Hawk said, I'm sorry, Ms. Camden. Lisha looked at him bleakly. No harm done, Mr. Hawk. After a moment, she added deliberately, Is there? No. Let me give you a memento of your visit. A memento. From a closet, the bodyguards tensed all over again. Hawk wheeled a wee sleep scooter. Of course, it probably won't go as fast or far or reliably as the one you already have. If you ever deign to use a scooter instead of a ground or air car, as over 50% of the population has to do. Lisha, Jordan saw, had finally lost her patience. She let her breath out between her teeth. It whistled fitfully. No, thank you, Mr. Hawk. I ride a Kessler Eagle, a high-quality scooter made, I believe, at a factory owned by Native American sleepers in New Mexico. They are trying very hard to market a superior product at a fair price, but of course they represent a minority without a built-in protected market. Hopi, I believe. Jordan didn't dare look at Hawk's face. As she climbed into her car, Lisha said to Jordan, I'm sorry for that last jab. Don't be, Jordan said. Well, for your sake, I know you believe in what you're doing here, Jordan. Yes, Jordan said quietly. I do. Despite. When you say that, you look like your mother. The same couldn't be said for Lisha, Jordan thought, and he felt immediately disloyal. But it was true. Alice looked older than 43, Lisha much younger. The aging caused by gravity was in the fine-boned face. The aging caused by tissue decay was not. Shouldn't she then look 21.5? Half the aging. She didn't. She looked about 30, and apparently always would. A beautiful, intense 30, the faint lines around her eyes more like delicate microcircuitry than soft gullies. Lisha said, How is your mother? Jordan heard all the complexities in the question. He didn't feel up to grappling with them. Fine, he said. And then, Are you going from here to Sanctuary? Lisha, half in and half out of her car, lifted her face to his. How did you know? You have the look you get when you're going to or coming from. She looked down. He shouldn't have mentioned Sanctuary. She said, Tell Hawk I won't make a legal fuss over the wall camera. And don't you agonize about not telling me either. You've got enough contradictions to reconcile already, Geordie. But you know, I get tired of these overwhelming physical presences like your Mr. Hawk. All charisma and outsized ego, using the intensity of their beliefs to hit you like a fist. It's wearing. She swung her long legs into the car. Jordan laughed, a sound that made Lisha glance at him, a slight question in her green eyes. But he just shook his head, kissed her, and closed the car door. As the car pulled away, he straightened, not laughing. Charisma, outsized egos, overwhelming physical presences. How was it possible, after all this time, that Lisha didn't know she was one too. Lisha leaned her head against the leather seat of the Baker Enterprises corporate plane. She was the only passenger. Below her, the Mississippi plain began to climb into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Lisha's hand brushed the book on the seat beside her, and she picked it up. It was a diversion from Calvin Hawke. They had made the cover too garish. Abraham Lincoln, beardless, stood in black frock coat and top hat against the background of a burning city. Atlanta? Richmond? Grimacing horribly. Crimson and marigold flames licked at a purple sky. Crimson and marigold and fuchsia. Online, the colors would be even more lurid. In three-dimensional hologram, they would be practically fluorescent. Lisha sighed. Lincoln had never stood in a burning city. At the time of her book's events, he had been bearded, and the book itself was a careful scholarly study of Lincoln's speeches in the light of constitutional law, not the light of battle. Nothing in it grimaced, nothing burned. She ran her finger over the embossed name on the cover. Elizabeth Kaminsky. Why? Alice had asked in her blunt way. Isn't it obvious? Lisha had said. My law cases get too much notoriety as it is. I want the book to earn whatever scholarly attention it's really worth, rather than a... I see that, Alice retorted. But why that pseudonym of all choices? Lisha hadn't had an answer. A week later, she thought of one, but by that time the stiff little visit was over and Lisha wasn't in California to deliver it. Lisha almost phoned her, but it was 4 a.m. in Chicago, 2 a.m. in Morro Bay, and of course Alice and Beck would be asleep. And she and Alice seldom phoned each other anyway. Because of something Lincoln said in 1864, Alice, combined with the facts that I'm 43 years old, the same age our father was when we were born, and that no one, not even you, believes that I get tired of it all. But the truth was, she probably wouldn't have said that to Alice, not in Chicago nor in California. Somehow whatever she said to Alice turned faintly pompous, and whatever Alice said to her, like that mystic nonsense of the twin group, seemed to Lisha riddled with holes in both logic and evidence. They were like two people trying to communicate in a language foreign to both of them, reduced to nodding and smiling, the initial goodwill not quite enough to offset the strain. 20 years ago, for one moment, it had seemed as if it might be different between them. But now... 22,000 sleepless on Earth, 95% of them in the United States, 80% of those within sanctuary. And since nearly all sleepless babies were now born, not created in vitro, most sleepless were now born inside sanctuary. Parents across the country continued to purchase other genetic alterations, enhanced IQ, sharpened sight, a strong immune system, high cheekbones, anything at all. It sometimes seemed to Lisha within the legal parameters, no matter how trivial, but not sleeplessness. Genetic alterations were expensive. Why purchase for your beloved baby a lifetime of bigotry, prejudice, and physical danger? Better to choose an assimilated gene mod. Beautiful or brainy children might encounter natural envy, but usually not virulent hatred. They were not viewed as a different race, one endlessly conspiring at power, endlessly controlling behind the scenes, endlessly feared and scorned. The Sleepless, Lisha had written for a national magazine, were to the 21st century what Jews had been to the 14th. 20 years of legal fighting to change that perception, and nothing had changed. I am tired, Lisha said experimentally, aloud. The pilot didn't turn around. He wasn't much for conversation. The foothills, unchanging, continued to slide away 20,000 feet below. Lisha unfolded her workstation. It accomplished no good to be tired, not of the troubling gulf between her and Alice, not of Calvin Hawke and the fight behind her, not of Sanctuary and the fight ahead. They would all still be there, and meanwhile, she could at least get some work done. 3 more hours to upstate New York, 2 back to Chicago, enough time to finish the brief for Calder versus Hanson Metallurgy. She had a client meeting in Chicago at 4 o'clock p.m., a deposition at 5:30 p.m., another client meeting at 8 o'clock p.m., and then the rest of the night to prepare for trial tomorrow. She might just fit everything in. The law was the one thing she never tired of. The one thing, despite 20 years of the inevitable crap that went with its practice, she still believed in. A society with a functioning, reasonably uncorrupted, say 80%, judicial system was a society that still believed in itself. More cheerful now, Lisha settled into a knotty question of prima facie assumption. But the book still lay on the seat, distracting her, along with Alice's question and her unspoken answer. In April 1864, Lincoln had written to Kentuckian A.G. Hodges. The northern states were enraged over the racial massacre of black soldiers at Fort Pillow. The federal treasury was nearly empty. The war was costing the Union $2 million a day. Daily, Lincoln was reviled in the press. Weekly, he was locked in combat with Congress. In the next month, Grant would lose 10,000 men at Cold Harbor, more at Spotsylvania Courthouse. Lincoln wrote to Hodges, "I claim not to have controlled events, but confess plainly that events have controlled me." Lisha shoved her book under the seat of the plane and bent over her workstation, leaning into the law. Jennifer Sharifi raised her forehead from the ground, rose gracefully, and bent to roll up her prayer rug. The rough mountain grass was slightly wet. Blades clung crookedly to the underside of the rug. Holding it away from the white folds of her abaya, Jennifer walked across the small clearing in the woods to her air car. Her long, unbound black hair stirred in the faint wind. A light plane streaked overhead. Jennifer frowned. Lisha Camden already. Jennifer was late. Let Lisha wait, or let Richard deal with her. Jennifer had not wanted Lisha here in the first place. Why should Sanctuary welcome a woman who worked against it at every turn? Even the Quran, in its quaint pre-global net simplicity, was explicit about traitors. Whosoever commits aggression against you, you commit him, like as he has committed against you. The small plane with the Baker Enterprises logo disappeared into the trees. Jennifer slipped into her car, her mind busy with the rest of the day ahead. Were it not for the solace and quiet of morning and afternoon prayer, she didn't think she could face some of her days. "But you have no religious faith," Richard had said, smiling. "You're not even a believer." Jennifer hadn't tried to explain to him that religious belief was not the point. The will to believe created its own power, its own faith, and ultimately its own will. Through the practice of faith, whatever its specific rituals, one brought into existence the object of that faith. The believer became the creator. "I believe," Jennifer said each dawn and each noon, kneeling on the grass or the leaves or the snow, in sanctuary. She shaded her eyes, trying to see exactly where Lisha's plane had disappeared. It was being tracked, Jennifer assumed, by both the Langdon sensors and the anti-aircraft lasers. She lifted her air car, flying well under the Y-field dome. What would her paternal great-grandmother, Najah Fatima Nur el-Dahar, have said about a fate such as hers? On the other hand, her maternal great-grandmother, whose granddaughter became an American movie star, had herself survived as an Irish immigrant turned Brooklyn cleaning lady, and thus probably understood something about power and will. Not that great-grandmothers, anybody's great-grandmothers, mattered any longer. Nor grandfathers, nor fathers. A new race had always been required to sacrifice its roots to its own survival. Zeus, Jennifer would guess, had mourned neither Cronus nor Rhea. Sanctuary spread below her in the morning sun. In 22 years, it had grown to nearly 300 square miles, occupying a fifth of Cattaraugus County, New York. Jennifer had acquired the Allegheny Indian Reservation immediately after the repeal of congressional trust restrictions. She had paid a sum that made the Seneca tribe that sold it comfortable in Manhattan, Paris, and Dallas. There hadn't actually been very many Senecas left to sell. Not all threatened groups, Jennifer well knew, had the adaptable skills of the Sleepless, skills such as buying land when the owners were initially reluctant to sell, or acquiring anti-aircraft lasers on the international arms market. Or if those other groups did have these skills, they lacked the cause to make them focused and clean and holy. To call survival itself what it actually was, a holy war, jihad. Allegheny had been unique among Native American reservations in containing an entire non-Indian city, Salamanca, leased from the Senecas by city residents since 1892. Salamanca had been included in Jennifer's purchase. The lessees all had received eviction notices, and after multiple court fights, for which Salamanca residents had little money and Sanctuary had the donated services of the best sleepless lawyers in the country, the city's outdated buildings, gutted, had become the shells of Sanctuary's high-tech city: research hospital, college, securities exchange, power and maintenance centers, and the most sophisticated telecommunications in existence, all surrounded by ecologically maintained woodland. In the distance, beyond Sanctuary's gates, Jennifer could see the daily line of trucks toiling up the mountain road. bringing in food, building materials, low-tech supplies, everything Sanctuary would rather import than produce, which included everything non-challenging, non-profitable, or non-essential. Not that Sanctuary was dependent on the daily trucks. It had enough of everything to run self-sufficiently for a year, if necessary. It wouldn't be necessary. Sleepless controlled too many factories, distribution channels, agricultural research centers, commodity exchanges, and law offices on the outside. Sanctuary had not ever been planned as a survivalist retreat. It was a fortified command center. The airfield ground car was already parked in front of the house Jennifer shared with her husband and 2 children at the edge of Argus City. The house was a geodesic dome, graceful and efficient, but not opulent. Build the security facilities first, Tony and Davino had argued 22 years ago. Then build the technical and educational facilities, then the storage warehouses, and the individual dwellings last. Only now was Sanctuary getting around to new individual dwellings. Jennifer adjusted the folds of her abaya, took a deep breath, and entered her house. Lisha stood by the southern glass wall of the living room, staring at the gold-framed hollow portrait of Tony, who stared back from smiling, youthful eyes. Sunlight caught in Lisha's blonde hair and blazed. When she heard Jennifer and turned, Lisha was backlit by the windows, and Jennifer couldn't see her expression. The 2 women stared at each other. Jennifer. Hello, Lisha. You're looking well. As are you. And Richard? How are he and the kids? Fine, thank you, Jennifer said. There was a silence, prickly as heat. Lisha said, I think you know why I'm here. Why, no, I don't, Jennifer said, although, of course, she did. Sanctuary monitored the movements of all Sleepless who remained outside, but none more than Lisha Camden and Kevin Baker. Lisha made a brief, impatient noise. Don't be evasive with me, Jennifer. If we can't agree on anything else, let's at least agree to be honest. She never changed, Jennifer thought. All that intelligence, all that experience, and yet she did not change. A triumph of naive idealism of both intelligence and experience. The deliberately blind deserve not to see. All right, Lisha, we'll be honest. You're here to find out if yesterday's attack on the We Sleep textile factory in Atlanta originated in Sanctuary. Lisha stared before she exploded. Good God, Jennifer, of course I'm not. Don't you think I know you don't fight that way? Especially not against a low-tech operation grossing less than $500,000 annually. Jennifer muffled a smile. The pairing of objections, moral and economic, was pure Lisha. And of course, Sanctuary hadn't directed the attack. The We Sleep people were insignificant. She said, I'm relieved to hear your opinion of assessing. Lisha waved her arm. Inadvertently, her hand brushed Tony's hollow. The image turned its head in her direction. My opinion is irrelevant, as you've made clear enough. I'm here because Kevin gave me this. She pulled a hard copy from her pocket and thrust it at Jennifer, realized with a nasty joke what it was. She made her face impassive, realizing too late that impassivity would tell Lisha just as much as emotion. How had Lisha and Kevin gotten a hard copy? Her mind ran over the possibilities, but she wasn't a DataNet expert. She would have to pull Will Rinaldi and Cassie Blumenthal off their other projects immediately to go over the entire net for gates and bubbles and geysers. Don't bother, Lisha said. Kevin's wizards didn't get it off the Sanctuary net. This was mailed to me directly, by one of your own. That was even worse. Someone inside Sanctuary, someone who secretly sided with the sleeper lovers, someone who was without the ability to recognize a war of survival. Unless, of course, Lisha was lying. But Jennifer had never caught Lisha in a lie. It was part of Lisha's pathetic, dangerous naivete to prefer unadjusted truth. Lisha crumpled the paper in her hand and threw it across the living room. How could you divide us further like this, Jennifer? Set up a separate Sleepless council in secret, with membership limited to those who take this so-called oath of solidarity. I vow to hold the interests of Sanctuary above all other loyalties, personal, political, and economic, and to pledge to its survival, and so to my own, my life, fortune, and sacred honor. Good God! What an unholy alliance of religious fanaticism and the Declaration of Independence. But you always did have a tin ear. Jennifer gazed at her impassively. You were being stupid. It was the worst epithet either of them had. Only you and Kevin and your handful of soft-minded doves don't see that this is a war of survival. War demands clearly drawn lines, especially for strategic information. We can't afford voting privileges for the fifth column. Lisha's eyes narrowed. This is not a war. A war is attack and response. If we don't counterattack, if we go on being productive and law-abiding citizens, eventually we'll win assimilation by sheer economic power, like every other newly franchised group. But not if we split into factions like this. You used to know that, Jenny, she said sharply. Don't call me that. Just barely did she stop herself from glancing at Tony's picture. Lisha didn't apologize. More calmly, Jennifer added, assimilation doesn't come with economic power alone. It's won by political power, which we don't have, and in a democracy never will have. There aren't enough of us to form a significant voting bloc. You used to know that. You've already set up the strongest covert lobby in Washington. You buy the votes you need. Political power flows from money. It always has. The concept of society is about money. Any values we want to change or advocate, we have to change or advocate within the framework of money. And we are. But how can we advocate a single trade ecology for Sleeper and Sleepless if you split us into warring factions? We wouldn't be split if you and yours could recognize a war when you saw one. I recognize hatred when I see it. It's in your stupid oath. They had reached an impasse, the same old impasse. Jennifer crossed the room to the bar. Her black hair floated behind her. Would you like a drink, Lisha? Jennifer, Lisha said, and stopped. After a moment, with a visible effort, she went on. If your sanctuary council becomes a reality, you'll shut us out. Me and Kevin and Jean-Claude and Stella and the others. We won't have a voting voice in statements to the media. We won't be included in governance decisions. We won't even be able to help with the new Sleepless kids because nobody who takes the oath will be allowed to use GroupNet, only the sanctuary net. What's next? A boycott on doing business with any of us? Jennifer didn't answer, and Lisha said slowly, Oh my God, you are. You are thinking of an economic boycott. That would not be my decision. It would take the whole sanctuary council. I doubt they would vote such a boycott. But you would. I was never a Yagaiist, Lisha. I don't believe in the predominance of individual excellence over the welfare of the community. Both are important. This isn't about Yagaiism, and you know it. This is about control, Jennifer. You hate everything you can't control, just like the worst of the sleepers do. But you go farther than they do. You make control into something holy because you need holiness as well. This is all about what you, Jennifer Sharifi, need, not what the community needs. Jennifer walked from the room, gripping her hands together to keep them from shaking. It was her own fault, of course, that any other person had enough power over her to cause them to shake. A fault, a weakness, that she had failed to root out. Her failure. In the hall, her children barreled into her from their playroom. Mom, come see what we built! Jennifer put one hand on each of their heads. There was a knot somewhere in Nadja's coarse hair. Ricky's, darker than his older sister's but finer, felt like cool silk. Jennifer's hands steadied. The children caught sight of the living room. Aunt Lisha! Aunt Lisha's here! Their hair left Jennifer's fingers. Aunt Lisha, come see what we built on CAD. Of course, Jennifer heard Lisha's voice say. I want to, but let me just ask your mother one more thing. Jennifer didn't turn around. If the traitor inside had mailed Lisha notice of the Oath of Solidarity, what else had she been mailed? But all Lisha said was, Did Richard receive the subpoena for Simpson versus offshore fishing? Yes, he did. He's preparing his expert testimony now, in fact. Good, Lisha said bleakly. Ricky looked from Lisha to his mother. His voice had lost some of its exuberance. Mom, should I go get Dad? Aunt Lisha will want to see Dad, won't she? Jennifer smiled at her son. She could feel the lavishness, her own smile, lush with relief. Offshore fishing rights. Almost she could pity Lisha. Her days were given to such triviality. Yes, of course, Ricky, she said, turning the lavish smile on Lisha. Go get your father. Your Aunt Lisha will want to visit with him. Of course she will. 9. Lisha, said the receptionist in her law office, this gentleman has been waiting to see you for 3 hours. He doesn't have an appointment. I told him you might not even be back today, but he stayed anyway. The man stood, lurching a little with the stiffness of someone who had held muscles too long in one tense position. He was short and thin, oddly wispy, dressed in a rumpled brown suit that was neither cheap nor expensive. In one hand, he held a folded kiosk tabloid. Sleeper, Lisha thought. She always knew. Lisha Camden? I'm sorry, but I'm not seeing any new clients. If you need a lawyer, you'll need to ask elsewhere. I think you'll take this case, the man said, surprising her. His voice was considerably less wispy than his appearance. At any rate, you'll want to know about it. Please give me 10 minutes. He opened the tabloid and held it out to her. On the front page was her picture with Calvin Hawke. Over the headline, Sleepless worried enough to investigate We Sleep movement. Have we got them on the run? Now she knew why Hawke had permitted her to visit the scooter factory. It says this picture was taken this morning, the man said. My. And Lisha knew he did not work in telecommunications. Come into my office, Mr. Adam Walcott. Dr. Adam Walcott. A medical doctor? He looked directly at her. His eyes were a pale milky blue like frosted glass. Genetic researcher. The sun was setting over Lake Michigan. Lisha transluced the glass wall, sat down opposite Dr. Walcott, and waited. Walcott twisted his legs, which were remarkably spindly, into pretzels around the legs of his chair. I work for a private research firm, Ms. Camden, Sleepless Biotechnical. We develop refinements on genetic modeling and alteration and offer these products to the bigger houses that do in vitro gene altering. We developed the Pastan procedure for preternaturally sharp hearing. Lisha nodded neutrally. Preternaturally sharp hearing had always struck her as a terrible idea. The benefits of hearing a whisper 6 rooms away were outweighed by the pain of hearing shatter rock 3 rooms away. P-hearing kids were fitted for sound control implants at 2 months of age. Sleepless gives its researchers a lot of leeway. Walcott stopped to cough, a sound so thin and tentative that Lisha thought of ghosts coughing. They say they hope we'll stumble on something wonderful, but the truth is that the company is in a terrible state of disorganization, and they just don't know how to supervise scientists. About 2 years ago, I asked for permission to work on some of the peptides associated with sleeplessness, Lisha said wryly. I wouldn't think there was anything associated with sleeplessness that hadn't been researched already. Walcott seemed to find this funny. He gave a gasping chuckle, untwisted his skinny legs from around the chair, and twisted them around each other. Most people think not. But I was working with the peptides in adult sleepless, and I was using some new approaches pioneered at l'Institut Technique de Lyon by Gaspard Thieureau. Do you know his work? I've heard of him. You probably don't know this new approach. It's very new itself. Walcott wound a hand through his hair and tugged. Both hand and hair were insubstantial. I should have started by asking how secure this office was. Completely, Lisha said, or you wouldn't be in it. But Walcott only nodded. Apparently he was not one of those sleepers offended by sleepless security. Her estimation of him rose a little. To shorten this recital, what I think I've found is a way to create sleeplessness in adults who were born sleepers. Lisha's hands moved to pick up what? Something. The hands stopped. She stared at them. Not all the problems are worked out yet. Walcott launched into a complicated thesis of altered peptide manufacture, neuron synapses, and redundant information coding in DNA, none of which Lisha could follow. She sat quietly while the universe took a different shape. Dr. Walcott, you're sure? About lysine transference redundancy? No, about creating sleeplessness in sleepers. Walcott ran his other hand through his hair. No, of course we're not sure. How could we be? We need controlled experiments, additional replications, not to mention funding for. But in theory, you can do it? Oh, theory, Walcott said. And even in her shock, this seemed an odd dismissal for a scientist to make. Evidently, Walcott was a pragmatist. Yes, we can do it in theory. With all the side effects, including longevity? Well, that's one of the things we don't know. This is all very rough yet, but before we go any further, we need a lawyer. The sentence centered Lisha. Something was not right here. She found it. Why are you here alone, Dr. Walcott? Surely any legal situation connected with this research is the responsibility of Sleepless, and surely the firm has its own counsel. Director Lee doesn't know I'm here. I'm acting on my own. I need a lawyer in a personal capacity. Lisha picked up a paper magnet. That must have been what her fingers had been searching for. Yes, why not? Turned it on, turned it off, stroked it with her fingers. The translucent window glowed behind Walcott's head. Go on. When I first realized where this line of research was heading, my assistant and I took it offline. Completely. We kept no records in the company datanet, ran no simulations on anything except freestanding computers, wiped all programs each night, and took hard copies, the only copies, of all progress home with us each night in portable safes in duplicate. We told no one what we were doing, not even the director. Why did you do that, Doctor? Because Sleepless is a public company and 62% of the stock is divided between two mutual funds controlled by Sleepless. When he turned his head, the pale milky eyes seemed to absorb light. One of the mutual funds is offered by Keniston Fidelity. The other is traded from Sanctuary. Forgive me, Ms. Camden, for being so blunt, and even more for the reasoning behind the bluntness, but Director Lee is not a particularly admirable man. He has been indicted before, although not convicted, of misuse of funds. My assistant and I were afraid that if he was approached by anyone from Sanctuary to discontinue the research, or anything. In the beginning, my assistant and I had only a glimmer, a wild enough glimmer that we weren't sure we could interest any other reputable research company. To tell the truth, we're still not. It's still just theory, and Sanctuary could have offered so very much money to just cut the whole thing off. Elisha was careful not to answer. Well, 2 months ago something odd happened. We knew, of course, that the Sleepless net probably wasn't secure. What net is, realistically. That's why we weren't on it. But Timmy and I, Timmy is my assistant, Dr. Timothy Herlinger, didn't realize that people scanned the nets not only for what was on it, but for what wasn't. Apparently they do. Somebody outside the company must have been routinely matching lists of employees with net files, because Timmy and I came into our lab one morning and there was a message on our terminal. What the hell have you two guys been working on for 2 months? Elisha said, how do you know the message was from outside the company and not a snide hint of discovery from your director? Because our director couldn't discover a boil on his ass, Walcott said, surprising her again. Although that's not the real reason. The message was signed, stockholder. But what really scared us, Timmy and me, was that it was on a free-standing computer. No telelinks of any kind, not even electricity. It's an IBM Y, running directly off Y energy cones, and the lab was locked. Something prickled in Elisha's stomach. Other keys? Only Director Lee, who was at a conference in Barbados. He gave his key to someone, or a duplicate of it, or lost it, or Dr. Herlinger did. Walcott shrugged. Not Timmy. But let me go on with my story. We ignored the message, but we decided to put the work we had, by this time we were almost there, somewhere safe. So we destroyed all but a single copy, rented a safe deposit box in the downtown branch of the First National Bank, and took just one key. At night, we buried the key in my backyard under a rose bush. An endicott perfection, triple roses blooming consecutively throughout your spring and fall garden. Elisha looked at Walcott as if he had lost his mind. He smiled faintly. Didn't you read pirate books as a child, Miss Camden? I never read much fiction. Well, I suppose it sounds melodramatic, but we couldn't think what else to do. He ran his left hand again through the thinning hair, which had begun to look like tangled fringe. All at once his voice lost its confident strength, turning wispy and tired. The key is still there, under the rose bush. I dug it up this morning. But the research papers are gone from the safe deposit box. It's empty. Elisha got up and walked to the window. Unthinking, she cleared the glass. Blood-red light, low over Lake Michigan, stained the water. In the east, a crescent moon rode high. When did you discover this theft? This morning. I dug up the key to go get the papers so Timmy and I could add something, and then we went to the bank. I told the bank officials the box was empty. They said there was nothing registered as in it. I told them I had personally put 9 sheets of paper into the box. You verified that online at the time of rental? Yes, of course. Did you get a hard copy receipt? Yes. He passed it to her. Elisha examined it. But then, when the bank manager called up the electronic record, it showed that Dr. Adam Walcott had come back the next day and removed all the papers, and that Dr. Adam Walcott had signed a receipt to that effect. And Miss Camden, they had that receipt, with your signature. Yes, but I never signed it. It's a forgery. No, it'll be your handwriting, Elisha said. How many documents a month do you sign at Sleepless, Doctor? Dozens, I suppose. Supplies requests, fund disbursements, routing slips. Do you read them all? No, but have any secretaries left recently? Why, I suppose so. Director Lee has great trouble keeping support staff. The wispy brows rushed together. But the director had no idea what we were working on. No, I'm sure he didn't. Lisha put both hands across her stomach. Long ago, clients had stopped making her queasy. Any lawyer who practiced for 20 years got used to misfits, criminals, manipulators, heroes, charlatans, nutcases, victims, and shitballs. You put your belief in the law, not in the client. But no lawyer had ever before had a client who could turn sleepers into sleepless. She willed the queasiness away. Go on, Doctor. It's not that anyone could duplicate our work, Walcott said, still in that faint die-away voice. For one thing, we didn't get to put on the last very critical equations, which Timmy and I are still working out. But all of the work is ours, and we want it back. Timmy gave up several chamber music rehearsals to our efforts. And of course, there will be medical prizes someday. Lisha gazed at Walcott's face. An alteration in body chemistry that could transform the human race, and this wispy man seemed to see it primarily in terms of Rosebush's pirate games, prizes, and chamber music. She said, You wanted a lawyer to tell you where you stood legally, personally. Yes, and to represent Timmy and me against the bank, or Sleepless, if it comes to that. Suddenly he looked at her with that disconcerting directness that he seemed able to summon but not maintain. We came to you because you're a Sleepless, and because you're Lisha Camden. Everyone knows you don't believe in separating the human race into two so-called species, and of course our work would end that this sort of, he waved a tabloid picture of her and Calvin Hawke. And of course theft is theft, even within a company. Sleepless didn't steal your research, Dr. Walcott. Neither did the bank. Then who? I have no evidence, but I'd like to see both you and Dr. Herlinger here tomorrow at 8 a.m. And in the meantime, this is important. Don't write anything down, anywhere. I understand, she said, not knowing she was going to speak until the words were out. Making sleepers into sleepless. Yes, he said. Well, and he turned away from her face to stare across her otherwise utilitarian office at the exotic flowers, riotous with color or pale as moonlight, planted under artificial light in their specially built corner bed. They're all legitimate, Kevin said. He came into Lisha's study from his own, hard copy in hand. She looked up from her brief for Simpson versus offshore fishing. The flowers that Alice insisted on sending daily sat on her desk, sunflowers and daisies, and Jean Maud alum-vines. The things never wilted before the next shipment arrived. Even in winter, the apartment was filled with California blooms Lisha didn't really like, but couldn't bring herself to throw away. Lamplight glowed on Kevin's glossy brown hair, strong, smooth face. He looked younger than 47, younger, in fact, than Lisha, although he was 4 years older. Blanker, Alice had said to Lisha, but she had only said it once. All legitimate? The whole file drawer, he said. Walcott was State University of New York at Potsdam, and DeFlores University, not distinguished, but acceptable. Middling student, 2 minor publications, clean police record. Sits square with the IRS, 2 teaching posts, 2 research, no official acrimony when he left either of them. So maybe he's just a restless type. Herlinger is different. He's only 25, this is his first job. Berkeley and UC Irvine in biochemistry, graduated in the top 5% of his class, promising future. But just before his PhD was granted, he was arrested, tried, and convicted for gene-altering controlled substances. He got a suspended sentence, but that's enough to make problematical a job anywhere better than Sleepless. At least for a while. No tax problems, but then no income yet either to speak of. Which controlled substance? Luna Snow, altered for electrical storms in the limbic. Makes you think you're a religious prophet. Trial records show Herlinger saying he had no other way to make med school tuition. He appears very bitter. Maybe you want to call up the records for yourself. Lisha said, I will. Does it feel to you like a young man's temporary bitterness over a bad break, or a part of his character? Kevin shrugged. She should have known better. That was not the kind of determination Kevin would make. Consequences interested him. Motivations didn't. Lisha said, only 2 minor publications for Walcott and mediocre school performance. Yet, he's capable of a breakthrough like this? Kevin smiled. You always were an intellectual snob, my darling. As are we all. All right. Researchers get lucky. Or maybe Herlinger did the real DNA work, not Walcott. Maybe Herlinger's very capable intellectually, but either is an exploitable innocent or just can't follow rules. What about Sleepless? Legitimate, struggling company, mediocre earnings profile, ROA less than 3% last year, which is low for a high-tech organization that made no major capital investments. I give them another year, 2 at the most. It's badly managed. The director, Lawrence Lee, has the job solely because of his name. His father was Stanton Lee. Nobel Prize in Physics? Yes. And Director Lee claims descent from General Robert E. as well, although that claim's bogus. But it looks good in publicity releases. Walcott told you the truth. Record-keeping at Sleepless is a mess. I doubt they can find things in their own electronic files. There's no leadership. And Lee has a board of directors reprimand for mismanagement of funds. And First National Bank? Absolutely square. All the records for that safe deposit box are complete and accurate. Of course, that doesn't mean that they weren't tampered with from the outside, both electronically and in hard copy. But I'd be really surprised if the bank is involved. I never thought it was, Lisha said grimly. It's got strong security. The best. We designed it. She hadn't known that. Then there are only 2 groups that can manage that kind of electronic wizardry, and your company's one of them. Kevin said gently. That may not be true. There are sleepers who are good deck rats. Not that good. Kevin didn't repeat his statement about her intellectual snobbery. Instead, he said quietly, if Walcott's research is accurate, this could change the world, Lisha. Again. I know. She found herself staring at him and wondered what emotions had been on her face. Want a glass of wine, Kevin? I can't, Lisha. I've got all this work to finish. Actually, so do I. You're right. He went back to his study. Lisha picked up her notes for Simpson versus offshore fishing. She had trouble concentrating. How long had it been since she and Kevin had made love? 3 weeks? 4? There was so much work to do. Events were happening so fast. Maybe she could see him before she left again in the morning. No. He was taking the other plane to Bonn. Well then, later in the week. If they were in the same city. If they both had time. She felt no sense of urgency about sex with Kevin. But then she never had. A memory twisted in her, Richard's hands on her breasts. She leaned closer to the terminal, widening her search for legal precedents in marine law. Lisha said levelly, you stole Adam Walcott's research papers from a safe deposit box in the First National Bank in Chicago. Jennifer Sharifi raised her eyes to Lisha's. The 2 women stood at opposite ends of Jennifer's living room in Sanctuary. Behind the glossy mound of Jennifer's bound hair, the portrait of Tony Indovino blinked and smiled. Yes, Jennifer said, I did. Jennifer! Richard cried in anguish. Lisha turned slowly toward him. It seemed to her that the anguish was not for the deed, but for the admitting of it. Richard knew. He stood on the balls of his feet, his head with the bushy eyebrows lowered. He looked just the same as he had at 17, the day she'd gone to meet him in the small suburban house in Evanston. Almost 30 years ago, Richard had found something in Sanctuary, something he needed, some sense of community. Maybe he had always needed it. And Sanctuary was, always had been, Jennifer. Jennifer and Tony. Nonetheless, to be part of this criminal theft, Richard must have changed. To be a part of this, he must have changed beyond her knowing. He said thickly, Jennifer will say nothing without her lawyer present. Lisha said acidly, well, that shouldn't be too difficult. How many lawyers has Sanctuary captured by now? Candace Holt? Will Sandaleros? Jonathan Cocchiara? How many others? Jennifer sat down on the sofa, drawing the folds of her abaya around her. Today the glass wall was opaqued. Soft blue-green patterns played over it. Jennifer, Lisha remembered suddenly, had never liked cloudy days. Jennifer said, if you're bringing legal charges, Lisha, deliver the warrant. You know I'm not a prosecutor. I represent Dr. Walcott. Then you plan on handing this alleged theft over to the DA? Lisha hesitated. She knew, and probably Jennifer knew, there was insufficient evidence for even a grand jury session. The papers were gone, but the bank record showed that Dr. Walcott had been the one to remove them. The best she could possibly do was establish that some new employee or other at First National also had access to the receipts, if it had even been a new employee. How thorough was Sanctuary's advanced planning? Their covert information net was extensive enough to cover minor researchers working in third-rate biotechs, if the minor research concerned Sleepless. And Lisha would bet her eyes that no new employee at First National had ever been an old employee at Sampless. She had nothing but hearsay, and, of course, her knowledge of what Jennifer, a Sleepless, would do. But the law was not interested in her inner knowledge. That, too, was only hearsay. Hopelessness swamped her, frightening because it was so rare, followed by memory. Richard, at 17, running in and out of the surf with her, and Tony and Carol and Janine, all of them laughing, sand and water and sky opening up all around an infinite receding light. She sought Richard's eyes. He turned his back. Jennifer said composedly, "Why exactly are you here, Lisha? If you have no legal business to transact with me or Richard or Sanctuary, and if your client has nothing to do with us." "You just told me you took the papers." "Did I?" Jennifer smiled. "No, you're mistaken. I would not do or say that." "I see. You just wanted me to know. And now you just want me to leave." "I do," Jennifer said. And for a bizarre moment, Lisha heard echoes of the marriage ceremony. Jennifer's mind was opaque to her. Standing in her living room watching the green swirls form and break and reform on the window, watching Richard's hunched shoulders, Lisha suddenly knew she would never stand anywhere in Sanctuary again. To Richard, not Jennifer, she said, "The research is still in Walcott's and Herlinger's heads. You can't stop this from coming if it's real. When I go back to Chicago, I'm going to have my client write it all out and put multiple copies in very safe places. I want you to know this, Richard." He did not turn around. She watched the bent curve of his spine. Jennifer said, "Have a nice flight." Adam Walcott did not take disappointment well. "You mean there's nothing we can do? Nothing?" "There's insufficient evidence." Lisha got up from her desk and walked around it to sit in a chair opposite Walcott's. "You have to understand, Doctor, that the courts are still struggling with the limitations of electronic documents as evidence. They've been struggling with it longer than I've been alive. At first, computer-generated documents were treated as hearsay because they weren't originals. Then they were barred because there were just too many people who could break system security. Now, since Sabino versus Lansing, they're treated as a separate, inherently weaker category of evidence. Signed hard copies are what count, which means burglars and thieves who can manipulate the tangible are kings of even electronic crime." Right back where we started. Walcott did not look interested in this informal judicial history. "But Miss Camden!" "Dr. Walcott, you don't seem to be focused on the main point here. You have all the research in your head, research that could change the world, and whoever took your documents has only 9/10 of it, because the final piece is only in your head." "That's what you told me, correct?" "Correct. So write it down again, now, here." "Now?" The wispy little man seemed taken aback by this idea. "Why?" And Jennifer thought that Lisha was an innocent. Lisha spoke very carefully, choosing her words. "Dr. Walcott, this research is potentially a very valuable property, worth billions over time, to you, or to Sampless, or more likely, to you both in some percentage deal. I'm prepared to represent you with that, if you so choose." "Oh, goody," Walcott said. Lisha looked at him hard, but he truly did not seem sarcastic. His left hand wrapped absently around the back of his head to scratch his right ear. She said patiently, "But you must realize that whenever billions are involved, thieves are involved. You've already seen that. And you've told me you haven't yet filed for any patents because you didn't want Director Lee to know what you were working on." After a moment, she added, "Correct?" There was no point in assuming anything with this man. "Correct." "Fine. Then what you must also realize is that people who will thieve for millions might also— I don't say this would happen, only that it could. Might also—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The pains in her stomach were back, and she folded her arms across her abdomen. Richard, holding her in his shabby bedroom in Evanston, she 15 years old, meeting a fellow Sleepless for the first time, and filled with exhilaration like light. Walcott said, "You mean the thieves might try to kill me and Timmy, even without the final part of the research?" Lisha said, "Write it all down, now, here." She gave him a freestanding computer in a private office. He was only in it 25 minutes, which surprised her. But then, how long could formulas and assumptions take to write down? It wasn't like a legal brief. She realized that she'd been expecting him to fumble over the task because he was a sleeper. She made 8 hard copies of the papers on the small freestanding copier she used for privileged client-attorney information, resisting the desire to read them. She probably wouldn't have understood them anyway. She gave him 1 copy, plus the freestanding deck. Just so there's no misunderstanding, Doctor. These 7 copies will go into various vaults, one in the safe here, one at Baker Enterprises, Kevin Baker's firm, which I assure you is impregnable. Walcott gave no sign of knowing who Kevin Baker was. It wasn't possible for any genetic researcher to not know who Kevin Baker was. Tell as many people as you like that there are multiple copies of your current unnamed research project with different people. I'll do the same. The more people who know, the less of a target you are. Also, I urge you as counsel to tell Director Lee what you've been doing and to file patents on this work in your own name. I should be with you when you approach Lee, if we're going to establish personal ownership of part of this work apart from Sleepless. Fine, Walcott said. He combed his hand through his negligible hair. You've been so frank, I feel I have to be frank too. Something in his tone made Lisha glance up sharply. The fact is, the research I just wrote out for you... He ran the other hand through his hair and stood on 1 foot, an embarrassed, diminutive crane. Yes? It's not all there. I left off the last piece. The piece the thieves don't have either. He was more cautious, then, than she had suspected. On the whole, Lisha approved. Reckless clients were worse than untrusting ones, even when the person untrusted was the client's own attorney. Walcott looked past her, out the window. He still stood on 1 foot. The weirdly intermittent forcefulness returned to his voice. You said yourself you don't know who stole the first copy, but it's potentially very valuable to replicate, or not replicate. And you're a Sleepless, Ms. Camden. I understand. But it's important that you write down that last piece as well, Doctor, for your own protection. If not here, then somewhere else completely secure. And where, she wondered, was that? You should also, this is an important point, tell as many people as possible that all the research exists somewhere else besides your head. Walcott finally lowered his raised foot to the floor. He nodded. I'll think about that. Do you really think I could be in actual physical danger, Miss Camden? Lisha thought of sanctuary. The queasiness returned to her stomach. It had nothing to do with what did or did not happen to Walcott. She folded her arms across her belly. Yes, she said. I do.